Bella, I saw your question. I was just reminding everybody to mute as they came into the room. Okay, it is about 9 o'clock. I see we're still getting a few people making their way in, so I'll give it just another minute, and then we'll get started and just let people filter in as they do. Chad, you're able to admit people once I start talking, yes?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, perfect, thanks. All right, it is 9 o'clock, so I will go ahead and get the preliminary started here. I see some people are still filtering in. First things first, I want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us today for the grantee orientation for the Justice Assistance Grant Program for the 2023 JAG grant. I want to let you all know that we very much appreciate you joining us for today. I know that it's can be difficult sometimes to put aside 2 days for a training like this or presentations like this. But these grantee orientations really are an important part of the grant process. They are an opportunity to make sure we start off on the right foot, get everybody on the same page, establish good lines of communication, and do what we can to set projects up for success from the start. So again, thank you for joining us. Again, this is the JAG grantee orientation. If you're here for Psych 101, it's the room down the hall, as they say. But let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so before we start getting into the agenda formal, I would like to make some introductions to the JAG team that you'll be dealing with over the course of the grant. I'll start with myself. For those of you who've not met me, my name is Ian Silva. I've been a field representative with the Board of State and Community Corrections for about 1.5 years, and I was assigned to take over the JAG project back in October of last year. And before that, I retired from the Kern County Sheriff's Office after 23 years. I was a lieutenant there, and one of my assignments was working in the commanding the division that handled in-custody and reentry programs. That included serving as a project director for a BSCC grant. So I do approach this from the perspective of not only a field representative, but someone who's served as a project director, as many of you are right now. So I kind of have been in your shoes to some degree. Now, that's enough about me. Let me introduce some of my colleagues, and we'll start with Casey Warmuth, our Chief of Research. Casey, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, hi, my name's Casey Warmuth. I'll be here to introduce you all to the local evaluation requirements and some best practices around data collection. Happy to be here and congratulations on your grant.
All right, next we have Danny Feist, our Staff Services Manager.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning and tomorrow as well. There's a lot of really good information that will be coming your way the next 2 days. That's very useful during the whole entire administration of this grant. So be sure to take lots of notes, ask lots of questions. We're here to help.
All right, and next we have Chad Norrid. Chad?
Hi, everyone. I'm Chad Norrid. I'm the analyst for the JAG grant. So I will be probably the main point of contact for most of you through the course of the grant. I'm here to help and answer any questions that you have going forward, even beyond today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Chad. And I did put Chad there because he and I will be your primary contacts. You will occasionally hear probably from Danny and some other folk in the BSCC, but most of your correspondence will be with Chad and myself. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing screen just to get us underway on that score. Can my colleagues confirm that you are indeed seeing my PowerPoint? All right, thank you very much. Give me just a moment while I rearrange some things on my I had my screen perfectly set up, and then as soon as I did that, my perfect setup went away and was replaced by something completely different. Okay. There are a couple of members of BSCC that I do need to acknowledge that are not joining us today. First of all, our executive director, Katie Howard, who provides us great leadership and support across the entire agency. And then, of course, I need to acknowledge Linda Penner. She is, for those who are unaware, the chair of the Board of State and Community Corrections. And she also served as the chairperson of the Executive Steering Committee for the JAG project. And the Executive Steering Committee provided guidance and direction in the development of California's JAG program and of the RFP to which all of you responded. Before I go any further, I want to touch base on some housekeeping items. As you can probably imagine, for most, like we do in most Zoom calls, we do ask that you mute your microphones if you're not addressing the group or have a question. And when you do have your microphone open, if you can do what you can to reduce background noise, that'll make life easier on everyone. In terms of questions, if you have a question, most of us have built breaks into our presentations for questions, but if you do have a question, feel free to use the raise hand feature, which should be usually on the bottom of your Zoom screen there. I believe under reactions, I think it says. And then, but other options, you can unmute and simply ask to let us know you have a question, or feel free to put your question in the chat function. Chad and Danny will be keeping an eye on the chat. And if you could for us, just if you're going to put a question in the chat, lead on with the word question in capital letters. That'll help us kind of filter out the questions from the other stuff that sometimes bounces around in the chat function. Speaking of chat for the moment, if you would right now, we'd appreciate if everybody would really quickly throw their name and agency into the chat. That gives us a kind of an idea of who's joined us today. As you probably heard when you came in, we are recording this session, and it will be available for you later on after the orientation is complete. Another thing I want to discuss, we have built some breaks into the schedule today. However, obviously, we want you to take care of yourself. We do have quite a bit to discuss. We've kind of packed in a lot of information, so we do ask that you stick with us, stay as engaged as you can. But of course, self-care is important. If you need to step away, feel free to do that for a minute. Just rejoin us as quickly as you can. And if you do miss significant parts of the orientation, please go back and check that out on the video. And as Danny mentioned, please ask us questions now or later. Get a hold of us. Let us know what's not making sense. The idea here is to make you feel comfortable with the grant process and how your projects need to run from a grant administration standpoint. I will, in terms of background noise, apologize in advance. I have a small dog. I do work from home. I have a small dog behind me. If she goes crazy, you may or may not be able to hear her, but I will hear her and have to silence her. So I apologize in advance. Don't worry, it's not an emergency. Usually it means a mosquito bumped into our front door. She's sensitive to those things. So with that out of the way, let me move on. Give you an idea of what we're going to be discussing today. On day one, we'll be touching base on a little brief overview of the BSCC itself and the JAG grant. I'll be talking for a while about administrative responsibilities, kind of the overall operation of the grant. And then I'll ask Casey to come in and talk a little bit about data collection and evaluation. That's where she's going to get into those local evaluation plans and local evaluation reports. And then I'll finish the day with talking about things more along the lines of the program responsibility realm. Now, tomorrow is going to be primarily taken up by fiscal matters or fiscal responsibilities that we'll be discussing. However, Chad will be talking a bit about progress reports as well. Now, if you're involved in the program side of the equation, we do still strongly recommend that you attend the second day, because there's a lot of crossover between the financial elements of the grant and the programmatic elements of the grants. We strongly recommend that everybody at least have a sense of what's going on in both those realms of the grant. And then finally, as we mentioned in the email invite, we will be taking breaks along the way to ask individual grantees to step forward and make a brief, about 2-minute introduction about what their project is and what they're doing. I've got that kind of broken up over and mixed into the agenda over the course of the day and tomorrow. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the first one of those sessions. So let me dive right into our overview. And we thought it best to start with an overview of the Board of State and Community Corrections, because most of you probably want to know a little bit about who you're going to be dealing with. And so for those of you who may not be overly familiar with the BSCC, we are an agency that reports directly to the governor's office, and we operate under a 13-member board that most members of which are appointed by the governor's office. There are some people who are appointed by other entities like the legislature, but most are appointed by the governor. And as you can read here, the BSCC provides statewide leadership, coordination, technical assistance to promote effective state and local efforts and partnerships in California's adult and juvenile criminal justice system, including providing technical assistance and coordination to local governments related to public safety. So obviously that's quite a bit of a mouthful. So the best way to kind of show you how we do that is to give you a sense of what some of the divisions that the BSCC operate under, and that's a good way to kind of understand what all we do. So there's several divisions within the BSCC. The first one I'll talk about is the Corrections Planning and Grant Programs Division. We call that CPG for short, sorry. And as you can guess, we administer state and federal grant programs. And you already probably figured out that's the division that most of the JAG team work for, and that the JAG program operates under. There are some other divisions, though, that we need to be aware of. There's the Standards and Training for Corrections Division. They address correction standard and training and selection standards for probation and correctional staff for local facilities statewide. We have the County Facilities Construction Division. They administer jail construction financing. We have the Facility Standards and Operations Division. They inspect local detention facilities, including jails and juvenile halls, and they also deal with regulations and compliance monitoring for those facilities. And then, like most agencies, you can imagine we have a group of administrative and support units that provide support to our entire agency that support all those divisions. And we have units like administration, legal, and research units. I don't want to give them short billing here because we would be well and truly sunk without those support elements. So I do want to point out, as I mentioned earlier, this PowerPoint will be available to you later. And I went ahead and added some links into the PowerPoint so you have ready access to them. And one of those is to our BSCC webpage, which I'm going to really give you a super brief tour of. I just want you to be aware it exists and some of the features. Can someone confirm that you can see the BSCC webpage here? Okay, thank you, Danny. Just some elements. This is the front-facing page of the BSCC website. You'll notice up here, there's a section for meetings if you want to know about upcoming meetings. And if you do get disconnected and have trouble getting back to this Zoom meeting, if you go to that website under meetings, you'll find over here the link in the agenda to rejoin the meeting. So that's one thing I want you to be aware of. Another feature of the meeting of the website that I want you to be aware of, you can see if you want, I kind of went very quickly over those other divisions. They each have their own page that you can check out if you want more information. But one feature that I like to highlight for people down here at the very bottom, you'll see this sign up for BSCC email updates. And if you go in there, you have the opportunity to set yourself up to get email alerts about various BSCC activities that could be important for your agency. One of them I want to really highlight down here is requests for proposals. You can get emails when a new RFP comes out, so that if there's another funding opportunity that might be a good fit for your agency, you have the opportunity to get that kind of heads up ahead of the time, when those come out. I promise not to be jealous if you decide to go for a grant other than JAG. If a second grant fits your bill and you can do that right alongside your JAG program, more power to you. So keep an eye on those. So I'll go ahead and get rid of that. There's obviously way more here to look at, but I wanted to give you that initial quick tour. Let me pop on to the next screen. Just confirming we're back to the main PowerPoint, yes? Okay, thank you very much. I always like to make sure, because Zoom is still a little new to me, so I think you're looking at one thing and it turns out you're looking at something completely different. So I appreciate the confirmations. All right, let's talk a little bit about the JAG grant itself. Most of you probably, if you were involved in preparing your proposals, you know some of this, but I want to briefly touch on it again just to make sure we're all on the same page. The Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant, which we again call JAG for short, is named after Edward R. Burns. He was a New York City police officer who was killed in the line of duty back in the late 80s. There is a link on the PowerPoint if you want to go to the page where his story is discussed in a little more detail. It is compelling reading. JAG is the leading source of federal justice funding to states and local jurisdictions. And as you can see here in federal year, fiscal year 2022, they released about a little over $191 million in funding to states and territories across the country. Now, there's a point here that I want to kind of highlight for everybody. This is a federally funded grant through the Bureau of Justice Assistance. BJA is a part of the U.S. Department of Justice. And it is important to kind of keep in the back of your mind that this is a federally funded grant. The structure is that the BJA grants to the state of California through BSCC. They grant us the JAG funds, which we in turn subgrant to all of you, the JAG grantees. That's important to keep in mind, because as you'll see, as we start talking about specific grant requirements, we have requirements that come from the BSCC state side, and also requirements that are passed through the federal requirements as well, because these are federally funded dollars. So it's important to keep that relationship in mind. Another link that I provided you here that I want to make you aware of, and again, I'll give you a super brief tour of this, the JAG grant on the BSCC website. We actually have our own subpage on the grant. You'll find quite a bit of information about prior cohorts, other information down here, board items and whatnot. But the main tab you want to be aware of is this JAG, this 2023 JAG grant tab. If you click on that, you'll see quite a bit of information. You can watch the bidders conference of that. If that's of interest, you can look at the state strategy. And this is where you will ultimately find the PowerPoints for this orientation and the recording for this orientation when all is said and done. And you can get to this through the link, or if you just navigate to the grants division page from the main web page on the BSCC website, it's pretty intuitive. You'll be able to find that pretty quickly. And of course, if you don't, let us know. We'll help you get to that page. Okay, now those of you who were involved in the development of your proposals probably recognize this language pretty handily, that JAG program funding may be used to hire personnel and or purchase equipment, supplies, contractual support, training, technical assistance, information systems for criminal justice, including for any one or more of the BSCC approved program areas. And I want to just remind you of these program areas. When you did your proposals, each of your individual proposals identified one of these program purpose areas and the associated priority areas of need, kind of subsets under each of these PPAs, as we call them. And I just want to highlight those for you again, because they serve as kind of a high-level touchstone of California's JAG program objectives, and therefore the objectives of your individual proposals. All right, now, as I mentioned, you'll be able to access this PowerPoint, the recording, and some other materials that we'll put up on the JAG website. And then if you have questions that come up later on, please feel free to submit them to this JAG 2022 BSCC email. That is a group email that most of us on the JAG team will see if you send us an email, and we'll follow up with questions. So before I move on, are there any general questions I can answer before I dive into the next part of the agenda? I see we still have some people moving into the out of the waiting room. So if you're joining us, there is a video recording going on, so you'll be able to check out what you missed, but we're kind of just getting through the preliminaries at this page. Chad, do we have anything in the chat that I need to address before I dive into the next section?
No, the only question so far was, will this PowerPoint be available? So you already answered that.
Yes, we will absolutely make sure that you can get a hold of the PowerPoint, the recording, and the whole smash as a later reference. And we'll leave that on the JAG page for the remainder of the grant. So if a year from now you want to refer back to that material, it should be sitting there on the page. You won't have to go find it special. If you have trouble finding it, just let us know. Okay, I'm going to move on into the review of the administrative section. I'm sorry. Before I do that, I almost missed a step. We're actually going to go into our first round of grantee introductions. I almost skipped it. That would have been a terrible thing. So what I'm going to ask each of you to do, and I've kind of randomly arranged the counties. What I'm going to ask for the project director, or if the project director is designated someone else, to go ahead and jump on. And what we're going to ask you to do is just briefly introduce yourself. Tell us what county and what agency you're from, what's the name of your project, and just give us a brief overview of what your project is going to do. Now, obviously, we're asking that you limit these introductions to about 2 minutes, just because we have limited time. We want to make sure we get everybody in an opportunity to speak. This is not only a general opportunity to kind of highlight your program, but we do encourage networking between grantees. You can talk to each other as much as you can talk to us. And a lot of your fellow grantees have really great ideas that you might find of value for your program. I'll tell you right now, some of the questions you'll ask me, I might reach out to another grantee that I know has a really good version of that, or a really good process that might be of value. So don't be surprised if I reach out to some of you and say, hey, can I point such and such a county in your direction? I think you might be able to help them. The RFP is over. We're not in competition anymore. So feel free to help out your fellow grantees. And by dint of random, I did do a randomized thing in the computer to get truly random order. I would like to invite Fresno to unmute and tell us a little bit about your program. Fresno, are you around?
Hello, I'm Mark Cutchell. I'm a probation officer with the Fresno County Probation Department. I'm the officer assigned to our adult reentry planning program. I've been designated to explain what our program is all about. What we have identified in our county is that the time between defendants being sentenced in their matter and placed on probation and then their release time, we're seeing that we're losing a lot of our folks in between release and them contacting the probation department. So what we have received a grant to do is to try to connect the probation department while our defendants are serving some time in custody. So our program serves defendants that are between 18 and 30 years old. They're affiliated with some type of gang, and they've been sentenced to approximately 60 days in custody, have 60 days remaining in custody. What we'll do is we'll go inside the jail, we'll make contact with them in there, and we'll complete our assessment. We have a strong tool, which is an assessment tool, which is going to identify their risk factors to reoffend. After we've completed that, we'll take it'll give us an evaluation or risk factor of them reoffending, and then we're going to try to address their criminal needs from that assessment and create a case plan. We're contracting with we're in our RFP right now with the program to do case managers who will assist us in providing those defendants some services, trying to make the connections with our referrals, to go ahead and connect them with if they need assistance with housing, or if they need assistance with the program, or if they need assistance with food or whatever it is that's come up and that we've identified as the need for them that falls into their criminal JAG needs is what they're going to help us doing. So we've have money designated for mentorship. We've had money designated specifically for battered intervention programs if they have to complete those type of services. We've had a wide range of different services that we have monies that designated for. So we're supposed to pick them up 60 days in between. We have a multidisciplinary group that will be meeting with them while they're getting ready to be released. 2 weeks prior to their release, we'll meet. That'll include with their case managers, any type of therapist that we get involved with, any type of housing assistance with the probation. And then prior to their release, we're making sure that when they get released, they're released to appropriate people and are connected with the services they needed. We'll continue those services in the neighborhood of up to 6 months after we get released. They get released from custody, and then we're going to pass them on to a regular case carrying officer. But we're just trying to make the transition from custody back to the community smoother to try to eliminate the people we're missing or that fall off prior to them coming to us. That's it.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. I'll have to cut you off. Sorry. And I do just let me point out, Fresno is a returning champion, so to speak. And they are one of the projects that I got to go out and visit, and they really do have a good project out there. It was really neat to see what they're doing, and I'm looking forward to working with you guys again and going out and seeing that program again. It's a really good setup. All right, next up, if I could invite Santa Cruz, and please forgive me if I cut you off midstream. I'm going to have to kind of watch the time closely so we don't get behind the 8 ball. I'm sure everybody wants to get out of the room, so to speak, on time this afternoon. So, but thank you, Mark. Santa Cruz, are you with us? Can you jump in?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
My name is Joshua Pastor. I'm the departmental analyst here at the Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Office. Our project is also a continuation of what we had done during the previous grant cycle. So we're building on some of the successes that we saw there. Our project is kind of interesting because we call it the Comprehensive School Safety Program. And the reason for that is it really is comprehensive in that we bring in lots of different elements throughout the county to address the issue of school safety and school violence prevention. We have 3 specific sub-projects within that group. One is run by the Sheriff's Office. Our primary goal is to go into the high schools. We have student resource officers who address the issue of bullying, and specifically cyberbullying. Of course, bullying has, changed dramatically over the last 20, 30 years. Now it's primarily online, and that presents a lot of very specific issues, causing depression and violence and, suicide and lots of different things that are occurring there. We're also expanding on that to bring in sexual assault prevention and also some gang prevention elements to our modules as well. Our second module is run by the County Office of Education, and they have hired a school safety director to bring together threat assessment projects throughout the county and to make sure that all the high schools and middle schools are on the same page regarding threat assessments and how to report threats, and making sure that their plans are all sort of streamlined and harmonized and on the same page. And our last final sub-project, we're partnering with a nonprofit organization in the county, and they work with probation youth, primarily to address, to help them sort of get into the workforce. So they help them with documentation, with driver's license, with work permits, and with actual work applications. So working with probation youth on that end helps them sort of achieve their goals, and also fulfilling high school credit and credit accruals. So between these three sub-projects, we all work together, and that's why we call it this comprehensive school safety program, where we're bringing together all these elements within the county to work under one umbrella.
Nice. Sounds like a very comprehensive program. That's neat to see different elements working together. There's a lot of counties that I've looked at in the last group and in this group where you're bringing in different elements from the county to kind of be more comprehensive rather than a single agency. So that's nice to see that collaboration. Thank you very much, Joshua. Appreciate
Thank you.
that. Can I next invite Sacramento? Sacramento, are you with us?
Hello, I'm here.
Thank you.
My name is Ruben Moreno. I'm the supervising attorney for the Sacramento County Office of the Public Defender, the Juvenile Division. And our project is called the Juvenile Pretrial Program. Briefly, I know we don't have a lot of time here, but we are a previous recipient of the JAG grant. In the last round, we used that grant to begin a juvenile trauma response court in Sacramento County, which services our most traumatized youth, and that was a huge success. And so our county has fully funded that now, so we get to continue that program and start a new program with this new round of funding, and that is going to be our juvenile pretrial program. The idea behind that program is to kind of fill a gap in the current juvenile justice system, where kids, when they enter into the juvenile justice system, typically they aren't given many services or hooked up with the needed services until they're actually on probation. So that can take months, sometimes even years to get those services hooked up. So the idea is to put together a team of, we're going to have in-house, we'll have 2 attorneys as well as a master's level social worker, who from the moment kids enter the juvenile justice system, they will go in and meet those kids and start collecting all the information needed to begin immediately hooking them up to services, whether that's mental health services, trauma services, educational services. We've going to partner with current justice partners as well as a wide variety of community partners in all the different communities within Sacramento County to link kids up immediately with the services that they need, which had manifested in the behaviors that brought them into the juvenile justice system, to try to start helping with those immediately. The idea is by doing that, we'll set up a stronger community system for those kids. They'll be able to spend less time in juvenile hall because they'll have more time. The court will feel more comfortable with releasing them into, once we've wrapped them with these services. They should spend less time on probation, since they'll be hooked up with the same services they would have been getting anyways much earlier in their entry into the system. It will help with a reduction in community violence as well. And that same team who meets them from the beginning will follow them throughout their journey in the juvenile justice system. Another important aspect of the program is we are going to partner with a community agency who can provide not only mentorship and connection to pro-social activities, but also transportation. One of the problems we see with our juvenile clients is them making it to probation appointments or therapy appointments or court. And so we are going to help provide them with the transportation that they need to make it through those, make it to those important appointments as well, which again should help get them through the juvenile justice system quicker and set them up better for success once they're done.
Thank you, Ruben.
Yeah.
And this, in reviewing the proposals, I did notice we have quite a few counties that are working on that very early intervention and very early service connection process, and that's good to see because we know that works. Earlier is better in terms of those kind of interventions, so that's really gratifying to see.
Thank you.
Can I lastly, for this session at least, ask Tehama to tell us a bit about your program? I'll have to make Tehama really fast. I'm kidding. Tehama, are you with us? Anyone from Tehama County available? Why don't we come back to Tehama? Is anyone from Nevada County available?
Yes, I'm with Nevada County.
Oh, okay, let's go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Leslie Williams, and I am an analyst for the Nevada County Sheriff's Office. Our project revolves around our mobile crisis team, which is a co-responder model that embeds a clinician, a mental health clinician with a patrol deputy. We began it in December of 2020 with one pilot team. We work with Nevada County Behavioral Health, who oversees a contract with clinicians from the Sierra Mental Wellness Health Group. And in our county, we have a crisis stabilization unit at our local emergency hospital. And we were so successful with our introductory team in 2020 that we sought to expand our co-responder teams to a second team so that we can enable additional coverage, not only on both ends of the work week, but additionally, and if you're not familiar with Nevada County, we're over 900 square miles and ranging from just above Sacramento, Placer County area, clear east to the Nevada state border in the Truckee area. So we have a pretty large gap between our lower hill region and our high Sierra Eastern County. And so we wanted to be able to expand our services towards the east portion of our county as well. And so we were able to add that second team with some earlier grant funding that was expiring. And so we sought the JAG grant to be able to continue our teams and hopefully continue to expand services. It's been, our goals are kind of twofold, obviously, to help support those in crisis in the field, but also to help decrease the impact on our patrol operations, in that when we come across a mental health crisis, traditionally we would be transporting them to the crisis stabilization unit where they were evaluated at the hospital, and oftentimes taking those individuals in crisis outside of their home environment, which can actually escalate the issues that they're having. And so with our embedded clinicians on patrol with our deputy, they can actually complete those evaluations in the field, in that person's home environment. And oftentimes they aren't necessarily taken on, say, a 5150 hold, and they can be connected to services and follow up services with their families on scene. And so that helps the individuals in crisis, but it also then allows our other patrol deputies to remain on duty and not spend so much time transporting and waiting at the crisis stabilization unit or the hospital while those individuals are evaluated. So in a nutshell, that's our program here at Nevada County, is our mobile crisis team. Great,
thank you. And having come from a sheriff's office, I understand that's another advantage of that early intervention. It frees up other resources. So that's a really nice thing. All right. Well, with that, I think we've got our first round done. So I'll start sharing screen again. Get another confirmation that you're all seeing the PowerPoint again. And we'll go ahead and get launched here. So the next area that we're going to discuss is we're going to dive into the realm of administrative responsibilities. And I forgot to say thank you everyone for your introduction before I take over the screen and keep going. And in the realm of introduction of administrative responsibilities, some of the areas we're going to talk about are communication, general communications. We're going to go over some elements of the grant and agreement and its exhibits. We're going to talk a little bit about invoicing and reporting due dates, talk a little bit about the audit requirement. We'll talk some about subcontractors and non-governmental organizations, and then we'll just do a brief kind of pointing of everyone towards the two grant guides that run our grant apply to our grant, I should say, the BSCC and the DOJ items. So let's start by talking a little bit about communications. Now, just to understand, in terms of official communications, we can't, BSCC can't just pick up the phone and talk to whoever, or answer the phone and talk to whoever may call in. In terms of official communications, we need to make sure that we're talking to people who are authorized to represent the grant project. And those individuals are designated by you, the grantee, on your contact information sheet. So it is very important, if there is turnover, if somebody changes a position out, that the project director send us a updated contact information sheet. So project directors, please make sure, we do need that to come from the project director to make certain that we know that that change is actually authorized. Now, the people identified on the contact information sheet are listed here, and you can notice this isn't a hyperlink, but I did provide you a reference in the BSCC grant admin guide to get to some discussion about what these individuals are. But very briefly, they're the project director, that's the person in overall charge of the grant operation. The authorized officer, who is the person who was authorized by your governing board, your board of supervisors, authorized by your board to sign the agreement. Your financial officer, or you're sometimes heard them referred to as the authorized financial officer, or AFO. That's the person who certifies and submits the invoice and any budget modification requests. And then there's the day-to-day fiscal contact. That's the person who prepares the invoice, who actually fills in the information. And then there's the day-to-day program contact. That's the person who's on the ground, so to speak, actually running the project. Now, a couple of items I want to bring to everyone's attention in terms of some requirements for these specific positions. First of all, please note that the project director and the financial officer, one, they must be employees of the agency. Those aren't positions you can subcontract out. And then the second, they cannot be the same person. They actually we have to have a different person filling the role of project director than is the authorized office. The financial officer. So that's one point. And then the other criteria that you need to be aware of is the financial officer and cannot be the same person who prepares the BSCC invoice for submission. So one person, the day-to-day fiscal contact, should be entering the information in the invoice, and then the authorized fiscal officer approves and certifies that invoice and actually submits it to the BSCC. Now, I have, in reviewing your proposals, I do know that some of you need to make some changes on this score. I noticed some people who have the same person serving as the project director and the financial officer, or the financial officer and the day-to-day fiscal. If that applies to your county, the project directors, you're going to need to identify other personnel to fill those positions, and please submit to us a new contact information sheet. And again, if you send that to that JAG email that we mentioned before, we'll get those changes logged in. Another point that I just want to make in terms of, let's say, general advice, it's really important to manage staff turnover. This is a 3-year grant, so in all likelihood, some, if not most of you, will experience some kind of turnover in your project, and it may be in one of these individual positions. And it's important not to do just a quick handoff. You're going to want to manage that turnover and make sure the incoming personnel are well versed in the various requirements, expectations, objectives, to be very familiar with what this grant entails to make sure that those items get taken care of in a consistent way. I will tell you that some grantees that we bumped into in various grants where the grantees have run into problems, a lot of it starts with a technical assistance call with Chad or myself or one of the other in one of the other programs, a different analyst, where it starts with, hey, I just took this over a couple of months ago. I have no idea what's going on. Please help me. And sometimes that ends up being a day late and a dollar short in terms of how much we can fix certain problems that may have accrued during the time of that transition. So make sure we recommend you, when you bring somebody new on board, have them watch this video, have them read the agreement, have them go over these PowerPoints, have them reach out to us with questions. Make sure you have a true warm handoff so that you can maintain some consistency. We all know staff turnover is just a reality in our world, so it's important to manage that carefully. Okay, the next thing I want to talk a little bit about is just to go over some elements of your grant agreement. And as you can see, one of the things we recommend, or that we actually require, is that you keep a copy of the fully executed grant agreement on file for your project site. And by fully executed, we mean that BSCC has signed it as well as you, the county, has signed it. So you'll want to hold on to that. And I know this probably goes without saying, but please review your agreement carefully. There's a lot in these agreements, and I cannot possibly, unless we want orientation to be a week and a half, I cannot possibly cover every element of the agreement. So make sure you go through that. And if you run into questions, please reach out to us and let us know. Some of you already have, and that tells me some of you are very carefully reviewing the agreement, and thank you for that. I do want to just highlight some things. Please notice that the grant agreement actually incorporates some other documents that are important to realize. You'll see here, and I do want to note for everybody, this is an older draft that I put this into PowerPoint some time ago. Your new contract looks slightly different than this, but it's pretty much the same. But you'll notice it incorporates some federal award conditions, some special terms and conditions. It incorporates the RFP, and it does incorporate your proposal. That's an important touchstone to keep in mind, because that's where we're memorializing what you proposed and what you essentially said you were going to do for this project. And that's incorporated into the contract, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. Another element I want to bring to your attention is the grant agreement term. And I want to go over this because this can get a little confused from time to time. So I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So the actual grant agreement term, the period in which we are quote unquote under contract, goes from June 1st to December 31st. I'm sorry, June 1st of this year, 2023, to December 31st of 2026. However, the grant service period, that is the period of time in which you can actually operate your grant, provide services, and incur operational costs for your grant, is limited to June 1st of 2023 to June 30th of 2026. So you see it stops 6 months earlier than the actual contract period. So that last 6-month period is limited to finalizing and submitting your local evaluation report and your final financial audit. So I just want to make sure that everyone's clear on that. Come June 30th of 2026, you're going to need to stop operations of your grant project. You can't incur any more costs except for what we're talking about in terms of the local evaluation report. Another point that I want to bring to your attention are these are in the these due dates are in your grant agreement, and you can see here down at the bottom I went ahead and put it's not a link, but again just a reference to where you can find that in your grant agreement. And that is the invoicing due dates. And we do really want to emphasize making sure everyone gets their invoices in on time so we can get those approved timely and get your reimbursement back out to you. These are, as you'll notice, says at the top, you're paid quarterly in arrears. So you submit an invoice for the quarter and then we reimburse you for those costs. So you'll notice here, most of these are, the first quarter is a little short, but most of them are, excuse me, 3-month quarters. And as you can see here, after the end of a quarter, for example, September 30th, 2023 ends a quarter, and you have some time, excuse me, again, I'll choose a different example, but most of the time you have about a month and a half to assemble the information necessary to send us that invoice and get that invoice turned into us on time. Excuse me. I'm down here in Bakersfield. The air is a bit dry and it's starting to work havoc on me. Another point that I want to highlight is we do ask that you submit an invoice even if you don't have expenses in the corresponding quarter. Don't just leave it blank. Go ahead and submit a $0 invoice. And usually I do ask, please let us know why there's no expenses that quarter. There may be perfectly good reason, but at least I know there is or isn't some problem that I need to ask about or address. If you just tell me, hey, this is why we didn't have any expenses, then I'll know ahead. Please note that expenses are reported on a cash basis. I know a lot of counties operate on accrual or a modified accrual basis. So my finance friends, you may have to do a little translation from your system to get that properly reported. For the non-financial people, just to be aware, what cash basis means is that you report an expense in the quarter that you pay for it, not necessarily the quarter that you order the item or receive the item or incur the expense. So just as a really quick example, let's say we're in Q3 that goes from October 1, 2023 to December 31st. Let's say sometime in November, you order some supplies. They show up in late December, but you don't actually pay the bill until early January. Then you would actually report that expense on the Q4, excuse me, on the Q4 invoice that covers that January 1 period, because that's when you actually paid for the expense. So just please be aware of that. And then the last invoice item that I just want to keep in mind is that last invoice, invoice 14, is only for costs associated with the local evaluation report. You may not incur any new project costs other than local evaluation report costs during that July 1 to December 31st period. So please take careful note of these dates, put them on your calendar or however you do to keep track of important dates. We want to really emphasize keeping projects on track with invoice submission and approval. Another set of dates that I want to make sure everyone is aware of are the quarterly progress report dates. Now, Chad's going to go into the details of what we call QPRs later on, but I just do want to highlight these dates for you. They do not match up perfectly with the invoice dates because these go on to the Bureau of Justice Assistance. They have their own dates that we're required to meet. So it is really important that you make those submissions on time, and Chad will go into how that's done later on. Likewise, the last two dates I want to make you aware of are the local evaluation plan and the local evaluation report. So the local evaluation plan, Casey's going to talk about that a little later. That's where you lay out how you're going to evaluate your program. And we want to make sure we have those get in by December 31st of this year. And then I know it seems like a long way away, but the other due date we need to know, keep in mind of is that local evaluation report where you're actually reporting on your outcomes. And that's December 31st of 2026. I know I don't have a question PowerPoint here, but are there any questions before I move on that need to be addressed right now? Chad, do I have anything in the chat?
Yeah, there's two in the chat. I kind of answered one, but if you want to address it, it says,
Go
is
ahead.
the authorized officer or excuse me, if the authorized officer position is the chairman of the Board of Supervisors, will an update need to be submitted when a new chairman is appointed?
Yes, please do. Just
And
so we have a
then-
good name on that. Yes.
Sure, sorry. And
No.
then the second question is, are we allowed to claim accrual for the last invoice number 13? So for that last period, that's the official project period, can they, even if they don't pay it in that period, can they still claim it on that final invoice?
Yes, that is the one exception. I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but that is the one exception. For example, let's say your payroll, let's say you're paying people, if I understand the question correctly, let's say, for example, you pay an officer that's involved in the funded by the grant, and you're paying them all the way up to June 30th. But let's say you pay them on July 4th. That is the one thing that will allow you that is the one non-LER expense that you can report on invoice 14. You'll simply make a comment that that's a cost that was incurred during quarter 13, and you're just keeping track of it. You're reporting it on quarter 14 in order to ensure that it actually gets picked up on the correct quarter. That's the one exemption or exception to what you can report apart from LER expenses on that invoice 14. Does that answer the question? Am I, to whoever asked that question, am I answering your question properly or directly enough? Can I get a yes in the chat or a yes from somewhere to make sure I hit that properly?
So the she also asked, is that allowed for CBO expenses as well?
Yes. Any project expenses, as long as they were incurred in that prior quarter, as long as you incur the expense prior to June 30th, if you pay the invoice at least before that final invoice is due, that invoice 14 is due. If you incurred the cost in quarter 13 and pay it in quarter 14, that's the one exception where you can assign or report a cost other than LER costs on invoice 14. Any more on that before I move on? I'll let that. Well, I have another slide for questions coming up. So if there's further questions on that, or if we need to take that offline, when we get closer to that quarter, if you feel like you're going to have a lot of expenses that are going to fall into that realm, let's talk about it when we get closer so that you know we're on the right page.
Yeah, one more question that just came through.
Go ahead, please.
Is the project evaluation expense considered part of the final local evaluation report? I wanted to confirm if we are allowed to include those expenses in the last invoice period.
We're talking like expenses to prepare and collect the data and turn in the report and prepare the report. Is that what we're talking about? Do I understand that correctly?
That's what I'm gathering from the question, but if it's different, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, those would be exactly the kind of costs that we would normally expect on that final invoice. All right, let me move on to the audit. And if there's more questions about that final invoice period, definitely reach out to us. We can take those offline to make sure that we're on the right score. Okay, so the last thing I do want to point out is the audit requirement. Now, it's important to understand the audit requirement is BSCC doesn't mandate the audit. The audit is actually mandated by the Federal Code of Regulation, or the Code of Federal Regulations, those CFR that you see referred to. And the federal government requires that as a grantee of federal dollars, you're required to submit an audit for each fiscal year in which grant funds are expended. Now, there's a couple of options for this. So most counties, I suspect, will be submitting a single audit. That's, for those of you unfamiliar, that's something that's usually done by your county auditor's office, where they're going to do a large audit that kind of covers all grant expenditures in the county as a whole, and the JAG fund would kind of be swept up as part of that audit. and they would provide one consolidated report. If that's what your county does, it's probably going to happen autopilot. But if you're not project directors, if you're not among the people who get that audit report, you're going to want to get on that list with your county auditor's office or whoever does that audit to make sure that you receive that report so you can submit it to BSCC. The other option, if for some reason your county does not do a single audit, then you would have to do a program specific audit. And that would be something that's done through, there's different ways to do that, but there are some standards that you have to meet in the way that a program specific audit, that's where you would be auditing the JAG project by itself. Another point of the audit that you need to be aware of is that there is an exemption in the federal rules. If your county as a whole expends less than $75,000 in a fiscal year, then you are exempted from that audit requirement. If that applies to you, please let us know. But keep in mind, that is your county as a whole. It's not just your agency or just the JAG grant. It's your county as a whole. So let us know. And as you can see in your agreement, the due date for those audits are 30 days from when the grantee receives that report, or 9 months after the grant period or that audit period is over, whichever is earlier. So please keep that in mind. And because this is a 3-year grant, you're essentially going to have at least 3 years of audits, the 3 audits that you're going to submit for that purpose. Chad, that's all I had there. And I just realized I did have another question PowerPoint. So do we have more questions? It looks like maybe more stuff is coming up.
Sort of. This was one that came up prior, but I wanted to look at it first.
Sure.
The grant agreements show the local evaluation plan is due on July 31st, not December 31st. Do we want to make an official change to December 31st?
Do I have something different than what's on the actual agreement, Chad? Did I copy the wrong thing on that? I'll back up.
I think so. Yeah, because I just verified on one of them, and just checking another one just to make sure. I verified on a couple already. I just want to make sure that it is.
So this what I have here on the screen is incorrect.
Yeah, it's showing July 31st rather than December 31st for the plan, the local evaluation plan.
Oh, the local evaluation plan. Okay,
Yes.
we'll double check that and we'll get that. We'll confirm that date and get that out to everybody. But
okay,
I may have used an older version. I didn't realize we had made that change, so I apologize.
Yeah, I thought it was the same. But
any other questions that I need to address? All right, we can always.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything.
Okay, we can always come back. All right, the next area that I want to touch base on is subcontractors. So one of the things we want to be aware of if you do have subcontractors as a part of your project is that grant requirements for subcontractors do pass down for your grant. Those requirements do pass down to your subcontractors. So if there's a requirement or a prohibition that applies to you, the primary grantee, then that requirement passes on to your subcontractor and applies to them as well. The way we refer to it is the requirements follow the dollar. So it's really important to make sure that not only are you aware of the various requirements, but are your subcontractors aware of the various requirements. I do want to point out that your grant agreement does include specific language that is required to be included in the subcontracts that within the contracts that you sign with your subcontractors. And those items refer to retention of books and records and access to books and records. This is the same as the requirement of you as a grantee to retain records for 3 years after the grant period, and also to provide access to BSCC and other designated personnel to those books and records. And then another item that I just want to make sure everybody's aware of in terms of subcontracts is it's really important to monitor your subcontractors closely. Just like I monitor you, you should be monitoring your subcontractors. And that can extend to making sure that the subcontractor expenses are in line with what's in your proposal budget and what's in the contract that you signed with your subcontractors, to make sure that they have sufficient supporting documentation to substantiate those expenses. You should be doing desk audits periodically for those expenses. And you should from time to time be doing site visits for your subcontractors to make sure that you are doing your due diligence in terms of monitoring your subcontractors and making sure they are meeting all the various requirements, both in terms of the BSCC grant requirements, the federal requirements, but also your contract that you signed with them. So that's another important element. Now, as you're probably aware from some of the materials that you had to fill out in the proposal, your BSCC has specific criteria for non-governmental organizations receiving grant funds. I'm not going to go through all of them. They are listed in the RFP on page 9. They're also on that form that you filled out. So it's very important, if you do have a change in subcontractors or you're adding a subcontractor, that you send to us a newly updated version of this form to include that new subcontractor. You'll want to make sure that you have kept track of that and have that new form on file, because as you'll notice here, BSCC cannot reimburse for expenses that were incurred by an NGO that does not meet these requirements. So that's a very important point to keep track of. Now, if you have any changes now that aren't included in this form, that weren't included with your proposals, please make sure you get that to us as soon as you can. One point that I do want to point out, one of the requirements that I highlighted here is that your NGOs need to be registered with the California Secretary of State's office. And one of the things I provided in the PowerPoint is a link to the California Secretary of State's website. And you'll notice right here, if you follow this link right here and you go over to this business entities tab, it'll take you to a pretty easy, intuitive search feature that will allow you to look up individual NGOs and to make certain that they in fact do meet the requirements of that they are properly registered with the Secretary of State's office. So that's an important point of due diligence you'll want to make sure you get handled. The other thing that is important to keep in mind in terms of your subcontractors is grantees are responsible for ensuring that no grant dollars pass through to any entity that is represented by any of the people who were part of the JAG scoring panel. That's a part of conflict of interest laws that we need to be careful of. So if any of these individuals, and you can find this on the JAG webpage that I showed you earlier, if you go to the JAG page, you'll find this roster that I included also on the PowerPoint. You should be making sure that any NGOs or pass-through entities that are getting grant funds, that none of these people are, let's say they're an employee or they're serving on the board the board of those entities or something along those lines. If they are involved, then that entity cannot receive JAG funds. Now, one of the things that I tend to recommend for my grantees, just so that you can document your due diligence, is I recommend printing out this page and then meeting with your NGO, doing your due diligence, doing your research to make sure that your NGO doesn't have any of these individuals involved in their or any subcontractor, if they're involved in that subcontractor entity. And then once you've done your due diligence and made sure that you know who you're dealing with and who's on those boards, get some assurance from your NGO that none of these people are involved, and then you can kind of sign this form or add some language to the bottom of the roster indicating that you looked, you did the due diligence, you made sure, and as far as you can tell, none of those people are involved. That way you have a record in your grant file indicating that you actually checked into that. And then obviously, again, if you change NGOs, do that process again, or if you have multiple NGOs, do that process for each NGO. All right. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of our administrative responsibilities is, as I mentioned earlier, because these are federal dollars, these grants actually fall under a couple of different sets of standards that we have to keep track of as we're moving through. So it's good to know about the various administration guides that are incorporated into our agreement that we need to be aware of. So on the PowerPoint, I provided you links to both of these documents. One is the BSCC Grant Administration Guide. You can hunt it down on our webpage, but this will take you directly to the link so you can take a look at that. I do recommend going through that in its entirety, just so you have a familiarity with the various requirements. And then likewise, I provided you a link that takes you directly to the Office of Justice Programs web page, where they have the DOJ grant guide. Office of Justice Program is the part of the US DOJ that the Bureau of Justice Assistance falls under. So that's why it's named a little differently, but it's basically BJA standards. Now, as you're looking at grant guides, one of the things that I just want to point you to, just so you're aware of, is that the BSCC grant guide has to address both state and federal grants. So there are some things that are allowable in state grants that the federal grants do not allow. We'll discuss some of those later, but I just want to highlight that. For example, one of the things you look at is, as you look at the BSCC grant guide, you'll see language that suggests that food is an allowable expense for your grant. So if you just look at the BSCC grant guide, you'll probably look at that and say, yeah, food's okay, no problem. However, that is okay for state grants, but if you go over to the DOJ grant guide, you'll find out that, and it's a little buried, but it's in there, you'll find out that food is almost never allowed in federal grants. So that turns out not to be a allowable expense. I have tried in some of these presentations that we're moving forward, I'm going to try to highlight those differences for you, but it is important to double check. There are two different standards that we need to be aware of. It does create an additional burden to have to worry about two different sets of standards, but they are there and we do need to adhere to them. All right. Do I have any questions about the administrative responsibilities, or for that matter, anything that we've covered up to this point? You raise your hand, unmute yourself and ask a question, or throw something into the chat. I've thrown a lot of information at you. So if I need to revisit anything, please let me know. We are on schedule, or even really a little bit ahead of schedule. So if there are any questions I can address to this point, now is a good time to cover those. Chad, are we looking good on your end?
Yeah, there's nothing in the chat right now. Oh, just got one.
Oh, something popped up. Let's address it.
Are we getting a copy of this presentation so we can go back and read it?
Absolutely. We will make sure you get a copy. Like I said, it will be on the JAG webpage, but if some reason you have trouble finding it or it's just not popping up, let us know. We'll get you a copy. One way or the other, you will have a copy of our PowerPoints and a recording of this presentation, so you'll be able to relive this in its full glory and look at all the PowerPoints at your leisure. Anything else that we can address, Chad?
I'm not seeing anything.
All right, we are actually a little bit ahead of schedule, so that is fantastic. With that in mind, let us why don't we do another round of grantee introductions, and then we'll take a quick break. I'm going to reverse the order of that part of the agenda. So let's dive into another round of introductions. Let me stop sharing the screen. so that we can see the presenter. Let's backtrack. Did we get a hold of anybody from Tehama that could tell us a little bit about their grant? Are we still a no-go on that, Chad?
Yeah, I'm still not seeing them. I sent
Okay,
an email.
we'll have to hunt down our friends from Tehama and see what's going on there. Well, with that in mind, let's move ahead to Shasta. Shasta, are you available to tell us a little bit about your grant?
Hello, everyone. Yes, I am available, and hopefully you can
All
hear
right,
me.
we
Great,
can. Go
great.
ahead.
Hi, my name is Darren Fisher. I'm the Chief Fiscal Officer for the Shasta County Probation. And the name of our grant is the Juvenile Prevention and Education Program. And as the name indicates, this grant has several different components to it, but we are working with and building up on successes from our prior grant, JAG grant for the most recent 3 years of working with youth and juveniles in our county. As you might or might not know, Shasta County is a small county or a rural county. And over the years, we've had several different types of challenges with their child and youth population. These challenges include things such as high rates of adverse childhood experiences. There's poverty rate of 18-19%. We have kids who are over 50% of the eligible population of students are eligible for the National Lunch Program. There are incidents of child abuse and neglect that are at higher than the state average. And we have substantiated cases of neglect and child abuse pushing 18% as of 2020. So the JAG grant, or the funds from the JAG grant, allow us to work with CBOs to facilitate them reaching out via therapy or programming or various types of programs of working with the youth in our counties. For example, there's the city of Redden. And so a portion of our funds are going to be used to support an entity called the Martin Luther King Center. And so what that center does, I'm going down here, scrolling down to it, is that it's a multicultural center that works with disadvantaged and at-risk youth via programming, therapy, and different types of pro-social activities for the youth in our county throughout the school year and even into the summer months. There's a variety of different types of opportunities that are offered there, including lunch programming. There's something in regards to there's a naturalist program where they can receive environmental education. There's scholarships that are offered where for different types of activities such as lifeguarding or water safety instruction, junior counseling training, blended lifeguard classes, and even umpiring and referee training. It's a fantastic opportunity to get kids involved, to develop pro-social activities, to work with, and even bringing the families into this picture for education and development. The program in there includes a year-round focus on STEM, which is very, very important when it comes to educating and developing our next generation of youth for our society and for our nation. STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. We want to develop, we want to nurture, we want to push our kids towards their continuing growth and continuing development, as well as at the same time mitigating and reducing those incidences that can sometimes push children into our justice programs in our county. And this is just one particular community-based organization that we work with. Our contract has up to, I believe 6 different entities that we're working with that provide different services, different activities, different programming, different therapeutic types of training development, working with families in order to pick up, educate our youth, and allow them to have those opportunities. And most importantly, it's not just for the youth, but overall, wanting to create a safer community for all of our citizens in our county. I know we're on the time limit, so I won't go on, but anyway, right. I think that's in a nutshell. I'm going to wrap it up here for you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It sounds like a great program. I love seeing I can't wait to come see this program because it is fun to watch. It is a lot of fun to see the programs that just have this broad sweep of things, because we know that the clients you deal with have a broad variety of needs and things that could be an advantage to them. So it's nice to see you kind of painting that broad brush. So whatever the specific need is, you have like an opportunity to fill those specific needs and be customized. That's nice to have a nimble program like that. All right.
Thank you.
How about, thank you very much, Darren.
Thank you, sir.
How about San Mateo? Are you with us? Another returning champion, if I'm not mistaken.
Hi, good morning.
Hi, Shirley.
I am here. Hi, everyone. I'm Shirley Chu, and I am the Clinical Services Manager for Crisis with the County Behavioral Health, as well as the Project Director for this JAG grant. Now, this is our first time, I believe, with this particular kind of model that we are going for. So what this grant, the name of this grant is Community Wellness and Crisis Response Team. What is that? Is that it's going to expand our mobile law enforcement co-responding team to 3 additional cities in our county. And the service basically will be embedding a mental health clinician in the police department of those 3 cities and respond to all crises calls that coming in through the 911 dispatch that a mental health condition is suspected or involved to be suspected to be involved. The mental health clinician will respond together with the law enforcement officer to the behavioral health crisis on site in the community in those 3 cities. And first, the mental health clinician will stage so that the safety for the scene is clear by the law enforcement first. And after that, the mental health clinician will be able to conduct crisis assessment, evaluation, 5150 evaluation, and put those people who meet the criteria for danger to self, danger to other, or grave disability on 5150 hold, and arrange for transport for that individual to go to the nearest PES. And for those people or individuals who do not meet the mental 5150 hold criteria, of course, the mental health clinician will provide crisis de-escalation, case management linkages, and be able to follow up short-term up to 60 days, and in some situations, actually up to 90 days as well, to connect to treatment and needed services. As well as for those people who may have disengaged from services, then the mental health clinician will be able to work with the individual family and treatment providers to coordinate and to re-engage the individual. So the goal of this, our project is really to promote public safety, enhance mental health connection, and enhance mental health and positive outcome, I should say, enhance positive outcome between the community and law enforcement officers. So that's the goal. And the 3 cities that we selected for this grant is based on the fact that all these 3 cities received the highest crisis call numbers through 911 in last year. And we have been implementing a pilot on this since 2021 in 4 other cities, and those 4 cities are the largest cities in our county. and the pilot is still continuing. Right now, we are in the second year of that pilot and have yield very positive outcomes, including mental health connection, really positive outcome between the law enforcement and the community, and understanding, increased understanding of mental health issues among the law enforcement. As a result of that outcomes, positive outcomes from the pilot, we went for the JAG grant, and we are excited that we are going to expand this to 3 additional cities.
Nice to see a successful project stretch out and do even more. So that's great. And I love the CIT model. I mean, talk about intervening. We talked about early intervention. You can't, it's kind of hard to get much earlier than that. So that's a nice a menu of options to work with. So thank you. Let's do another. Madera County. Is there someone available from Madera that can help us out? Oh, I'm seeing maybe not. Okay. All right. Well, we'll go ahead. We'll come back to some of these. Humboldt County, are you available? I thought I saw Shawnee earlier. Or someone from Humboldt County.
Can you hear me?
Oh, Monica. Hi.
My name is Monica. I'm from the Humboldt County Insurance Office, business manager here. As many of you guys might know, Humboldt County is a very rural county, making it ideal for illicit marijuana cultivation, that contributes to thousands of cases of individual and drug trafficking organizations. They also contribute to our fentanyl and opioid epidemic and an increased amount of human trafficking within the county. Humboldt County actually has been identified as a high-intensity drug trafficking area, and that also contributes to a lot of violent crime. We are building on our success from our previous grant, and over the next 3 years, we are planning on utilizing our partnerships with the Drug Task Force, who's made up of local police departments and the DA's office, and we are planning to deploy additional law enforcement against, the drug trafficking organizations, the marijuana violators, with hopes of reducing the number of drugs on the street, and then working directly with our DA's office to prosecute those criminals. Additionally, we have partnered with the North Coast Rape Center, Crisis Center, to provide education to the community, to our community, specifically targeting drug trafficking, human trafficking, and then drug facilitated assault, and then hopefully to get more outreach to the community. Our law enforcement will be tasked with investigating the sales, manufacture, and distribution of the controlled substances, with our goal of targeting our high-level to mid-level organizations, that hopefully distributing their operations, and then the human trafficking that they bring along with all of that stuff. So the grant will help us provide a full-time marijuana eradication team sergeant, and then we'll also pay for overtime for our drug task force members, so like your police department and a special agent for the DA's office. And then in addition, we also partnered with the California Center for Rural Policy at Cal Poly, and they will help us with data collection and so forth, kind of being the mid-person to get some of that data out.
All right, thank you very much, Monica. Another excellent program. This is a little more along the traditional lines of JAG, where we're focusing on task force and in this case, kind of drug enforcement. So that's good. I'm going to be really looking forward to seeing that project in action. Thank you very much. I'll tell you what we'll do now is we built in at this point about 10-minute break. So if we could go ahead and just everyone wants to go get that extra cup of coffee or stretch or whatever it is we need to do, and we'll reconvene at 10:40. All right. So thank you very much, and we'll see you in a little bit more than 10 minutes. All right. I am showing 10:40 on the button, so we'll go ahead and restart things. Before I turn the floor over to Casey for the data and evaluation portion, I just do want to re-emphasize something or go back to something. we were checking into while during the break. Apparently, when I prepared this PowerPoint, I was using the information from the RFP. Some of that changed in contracting. So when you're looking at the invoicing due dates, the due dates for the LEPs and the LERs, please do go to your agreement and use those dates. It looks like some of them were slightly adjusted, primarily the LEP. Those were adjusted a little bit between the RFP and the contracting process. So please double check your agreement for all of those dates. The ones in your agreement are the correct dates. So with that said, I would like to invite our Chief of Research, Casey Warmoth, to join us and start sharing her screen, and I'll let her talk to us a little bit about data and collection evaluation. Casey, are you all set?
I believe so. Can you see a PowerPoint?
We got you. Your PowerPoint is up and running.
Okay. All right, so as Ian mentioned, my name is Casey Warmoth. I'm the Chief of Research here at the Board of State and Community Corrections. I have a few short presentations for you all today, presenting a variety of topics on the evaluation and data collection responsibilities involved in your JAG grant program. And first, we will focus on the evaluation requirements. So JAG grant program requires grantees to perform an evaluation of the implementation of the project. And this will let us know whether the original goals and objectives of the project were met. The BSCC's approach to evaluation requires grantees to submit 2 documents, one very close to the start of the grant period, referred to as the Local Evaluation Plan, or the LEP. And that plan outlines how you will conduct the evaluation of your grant project, and one at the end of the grant service period, referred to as the Local Evaluation Report, or the LER, and that provides the results of the evaluation. As Ian mentioned, these 2 required documents were described in the request for proposals and in the subsequent grant agreements. So today I'll focus on presenting to you all guidelines for your local evaluation plan, given that that's due right around the corner. And then I'll also, at a very high level, review the guidelines for the local evaluation report, but understanding that's 3 years from now, and you may have some staff turnover by then, or some memory fade by then. We will do a webinar closer to the due date for the local evaluation report as well. Okay. So before I jump in, I have a question for you all. Instead of sitting here listening to me, my question for you all is, why do we require a project evaluation of the grant programs? So in other words, why is a local evaluation important to your project or the BSCC? And feel free to unmute yourself and chat. I'm sure there will not be a rush in over speaking, or raise your hand and we'll call on you, or you can type it in chat.
I would throw out that we want to know if it's working, if what we're doing is making a difference.
Great, thank you. So that's along the lines of demonstrate the effectiveness of the project. Did you achieve the goals or objectives that you set out to do? Any other reasons why an evaluation may be valuable or important?
Well, we might want to do some course corrections. We might want to sort of make some changes to the program, see where it's working and where it's not.
Great, thank you.
Some of these things are new programs, and so it gives us an idea of whether we're going to continue to seek board funding to continue the program, indefinitely.
Right. So not only important for you all for your program, but it also could add to the body of knowledge for other people that maybe read your report and want to do the same thing, right? So adding to the body of knowledge of what works, and then even potentially what doesn't work, given the population. Anything else? Well, I will move on then and give us all a recap. Some of these items you all did mention. So evaluations are incredibly valuable. And first, that they let us know that the projects receiving funding were, whether they were effective or not, which was mentioned. And in order to do that, you have to demonstrate whether the project accomplished what it set out to achieve. And to do that, you have to collect data and analyze that to support those accomplishments. So one thing that was not mentioned was that these evaluations provide accountability for the use of grant funds. They can show that funding went toward achieving outcomes in line with the intent of the grant. They can demonstrate to the public trust, which is where the money is coming from, what was achieved with the funding. And when used effectively, evaluations provide positive support to continue the funding through new cohorts of the grant program, which is kind of what Tom had mentioned as well. So lastly, a good evaluation will help improve the understanding of what kinds of programs are effective within specific populations and even locations. So this will help us make better funding decisions in the future, and even potential grantees as well, who may rely on the evaluation reports of individuals who implemented similar programs that they're thinking about implementing. So along that lines, it would add to the body of evidence for projects, interventions, and services to move from what we would consider promising practice to more evidence-based practice. So ultimately, evaluations are what make it possible to demonstrate any improvements and meaningful measures were due to the project. Okay. And in order to achieve all of these goals, you really have to have a quality evaluation, and a quality evaluation starts with a plan. Okay. So why are quality local evaluation plans important? So complete and a quality evaluation reports are how you'll communicate the effectiveness of your project. And this is accomplished even if the intended results that you were seeking were not achieved, because an evaluation can help identify factors that affected those project outcomes so that you can do better in the future. So this information is beneficial not only for project improvements, but for also other individuals who may be implementing similar projects. And these quality evaluations begin with a roadmap, which is the local evaluation plan. So it should show the planning involved in each of the steps needed to assess the outcomes of a project. It should focus on measurement and data collection to show the results that are most meaningful and relevant to the project and the intent of the grant. And also, before implementation, it is important to identify and define the measures that you will be evaluating to determine if the goals of the projects were achieved. So imagine for a second, if you didn't have a roadmap of how you were going to evaluate your program, how would you go about writing that evaluation report 3 years later if you hadn't had a plan and implemented it throughout the project? So chances are the data that you needed to evaluate your project wouldn't be available. Chances are that the relevant partners in your project probably wouldn't even agree upon what would be important to collect or demonstrate what was achieved by the project. And it's for this reasons that we require an evaluation plan, mainly because it is considered a best practice. And by planning for an evaluation and then implementing that plan throughout the project, you will be more likely to collect and report meaningful and useful data to demonstrate your project's impact. So just a little summary here of why evaluation plans are important, and we require those for you. And before I jump into the guidelines of a local evaluation plan, I'd like to take a moment to talk about the use of outside evaluators. So in an ideal situation, you would hire an outside evaluator through a contract to handle a bulk of the planning, compilation of data, and data analysis for your evaluation. The benefits of having an outside evaluator is that that individual possesses evaluation expertise to assist you in the collaborative process of developing your local evaluation plan. They can guide the local evaluation throughout the project lifecycle. They improve the objectivity of your evaluation. And they also provide you with an additional resource to handle much of the planning, data compilation, and data analysis so that you can focus on your project implementation needs. So we recognize that not all of you have the capacity for an external evaluator. It is not a requirement of the JAG program to hire an external evaluator. We just strongly encourage you to do so. And to do that at an early stage so that they can help you design your local evaluation plan and provide assistance with your evaluation throughout the project. Okay, so not to alarm you all, it's not a requirement, but just that we encourage. Okay. So moving on to the local evaluation plan. This is the first requirement that you will be responsible for providing to the BSCC. And it does appear that I have that due date wrong. It is apparently July 31st of 2023 is the date we're going with. Okay. So that's right around the corner. I was going to talk about how don't delay because 5 months will creep up on you really quick. But this is, you know, two weeks away. So yeah, hopefully you'll have given this some thought. But real quick, I'll talk about what we've developed for you all in terms of guidelines regarding the content that should be included in your local evaluation plan. So I'm going to real quick pull up our guidelines that we have for you all. And this is a document that will be posted to our website in your virtual binder materials on the JAG website. So Ian, can you give me a thumbs up if you all can see a PDF? Okay. So this PDF file will be in your virtual binder and it's labeled JAG LEP LER guidelines. And it first starts with the guidelines for the local evaluation plan. And talks a little bit about why evaluations are important and why we require it. Gives you yet again the incorrect due date. This is July 31st now. And I believe that you will just submit these to the JAG inbox. Okay. So the first thing you'll want to have in your local evaluation plan, of course, is a cover page. This provides a descriptive title for your report. It should identify the grantee clearly. It should identify who wrote the evaluation plan clearly, either the individual within your agency or an external contractor who you've hired. It should give the project time period, so at least the time period of services that will be provided, and identify the funding source. Of course, this would be JAG. Okay. The first major section of this report is what we refer to as project background. And the project background gives us the information we need to understand your project. So it outlines criteria for participant eligibility if you have participants that you'll be serving in your program. It defines the goals and objectives for your projects, and these should be the ones that were in your project work plan in the proposal that you submitted and the proposal that was funded and is part of your contract. Generally, we should not see changes to those goals and objectives unless that has been cleared through Ian, because recall that those are the goals and objectives that you were funded for, in your proposal. Okay. The next thing that we'll see in your local evaluation plan is what we refer to as a project logic model. Now go into a little bit more detail on our next slide into a logic model, but basically it provides a visual depiction of your project and shows the relationships between your inputs or resources of your project, and then what you do with those inputs and resources in terms of the activities that are completed. And then as a result of those activities, what your outputs are. So for example, number of classes administered, number of participants served, things like that. And then it outlines, because of those outputs, what outcomes you expect to see because of your project, and then ties those outcomes to impacts that you would see in the community or city because of your project. So generally what we'll see in terms of outcomes are things like participants become employed, or participants reduce substance use or things like that. And then the impact would be reduced recidivism in the community. Okay. And then we get into the bulk of the evaluation plan. We require two types of evaluations. We require first a process evaluation, which really focuses on the implementation of your program. Was it implemented as you intended or with fidelity to a specific model that you're following? Okay. So a process evaluation monitors your project's implementation methods. This is used to indicate if an adjustment or course correction needs to be made in order to keep your project on track. So of course, in here, we want you to talk about the research design for the process evaluation, your plans for documenting and monitoring the project components, and a plan for how the data will be analyzed and used throughout the life of your project. And of course, this document goes into a little bit more detail on the content. And then the next section we'll be looking for is a method and design for your outcome evaluation. And an outcome evaluation really focuses on whether those goals or objectives were achieved. So first, we want you to describe how you plan to evaluate your project's outcomes. So this would be the research or the methods, the research design. We want you to give the definitions of your outcomes variables. So we would refer to these as the operational definitions, and provide a description of the data that will be collected in order to track those outcomes. We want you to, if you have participants in your project, give a definition of what it means for a participant to be successful in your project. And then also discuss in here a strategy for determining whether outcomes are due to the project or some other factors. Okay. And then finally, the last section will be appendices. And this is where you can include any supplemental evaluation or project materials. So this could be your data collection instruments, a more detailed description of some of your activities or training materials, operational definitions can go in here, or any presentations that you've given that maybe help describe your project as well. Okay. So you can use this kind of as a template for your local evaluation plan, where these major sections would be just, you know, the headers of those major sections of your project. So we know where to look in your local evaluation plan for the content. Okay. I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint here. And talk a little bit about the logic model in a little bit more detail. So this slide here gives you an example of a very high level logic model. And you'll see how it has different columns or columns, if you will, for the different components of a logic model. So we have the inputs, again, the resources needed to operate the program. This could be the JAG funding, staffing, training, all of the inputs into your project in order to accomplish the activities of your project. So if you have access to those resources, then you'll be able to do these program activities. Okay. And then it ties it to the outputs. If the activities are accomplished, these are the number of services delivered or the products provided. And then again, the outputs. So if the activities are accomplished, these are the changes that you expect to see either in individuals or directly, immediately in the community. And then the impact are the long-term changes you expect to see as a result of your project. So this is really longer-term changes and really tied to the program theory as a whole. So these are generally things like recidivism, reduced recidivism, things like that. Okay, reduced unemployment, a variety of things, but generally the longer term goals that you won't necessarily be able to measure directly as a result of your program. Okay. We like you to keep logic models pretty simple. They don't need to be complex and take a lot of your time to develop. We will probably push back if they're too complex and take a long time to understand. So this is an example of a logic model that we do not want to see. This is very complex, would take a lot of head scratching and time for me to figure out the various relationships it was trying to demonstrate. So just to say, don't make it complex. We want it to be a very clear, even just one-page depiction of your project. We were going to do an LEP webinar to go in a little bit more details of your local evaluation plan, but obviously the September 20th date does not work. So let us regroup after this, and maybe I will do something closer to the July 31st date, like maybe that last week of July, to answer any last minute questions you may have for your local evaluation plan. Ian, did you have something to add?
Could I interrupt just for a second? The chat is exploding with, oh my gosh, we can't get the LEP in on time. And that's fair. We're going to regroup as a team and establish some kind of extension regime, some way of giving people more time, because that is just 2 weeks away, and a lot of our grantees are still on the contracting phase. So they kind of want to get the contract in place before they start submitting LEPs and stuff like that. So everyone, please just give us a little time. We'll send out a mass email letting you know how we want to handle extensions for the LEPs. We will give you more time than July 31st. I don't think we want to try to have everybody race to get a LEP in at the on that short a timeline. So we'll regroup and send something out so everybody has the same information.
That sounds fabulous. So with that in mind, as part of our regroup, I will try to fit in a local evaluation plan webinar. And in that webinar, I will talk more in depth about the type of information we're looking for in your local evaluation plan and give some more JAG relevant examples. And then talk about some additional resources that we have for you around your local evaluation plan. We do have in the works development of a question format template for you all. But again, that depends on where the new due date comes in. So be flexible with us and we will provide as much resources as we can prior to whatever the new due date is. And that local evaluation plan webinar will also include a period for you to ask very specific questions about your local evaluation plan, assuming that you've had time to work on it and come with questions prepared. So I'll pause right here. Other than what's the due date, do you all have any questions about your local evaluation plan? I assume Chad is skimming the chat and it's all about the due date. Looks like it's all about the due date.
Yeah, pretty much it's about due dates. And then if there's people asking, the big question I'm getting to is if the agreement is not executed by July 31st, do they submit by July 31st? So, I mean, it all boils down to the due date, but I don't know if Ian wants to answer that question or not.
Yeah, if you're not under contract yet, we can't make you do anything anyway. So, so that's not a problem. We will work with everybody to give a reasonable deadline for the LEP. If you're not under contract, you don't have it ready for July 1st, don't worry about it. We'll work something out. Like I said, I will send out something definitive in the next couple of days, just so everybody has documentation of what the new deadline for the LEP is, so that there's no question.
So I will briefly cover the content of your local evaluation report, knowing that it's over 3 years away and probably something that you'll just put out of your mind just over time. But you will see that it is due December 31st of 2026. I do believe that is the accurate date. It does build off of your local evaluation plan. So if you have a quality local evaluation plan and you've been following that along, you'll just need to make some updates to reflect any changes that may have occurred in your program over time. You'll want to update the logic model and probably change some of your tense from into past tense. So from we will to we did, right? So you'll want to update all of that. You'll see that the cover page remains the same. You'll just have to change it to local evaluation report. You'll add an executive summary, but this project background was part of your local evaluation plan. The logic model was part of your local evaluation plan. Your process, method, and design, again, in the LEP. And your outcome evaluation method design in the LEP. So you'll just want to update those to reflect what you actually did, and hopefully you followed the plan and there's not much to update there. The next major section will be presenting the results of your evaluation. So this is where you will tell us how effective the project was and make recommendations with what should be done again and what should be done differently. Sorry, that's what you will tell us in the discussion of results, is what was effective and what you would do again or differently. In the evaluation results area, this is where you will describe the actual outcomes of your project. Okay, was it implemented as you intended or not? What changes were made? And those goals and objectives that you had, did you meet those? Okay, and then you'll discuss the impact of that. A grantee highlight is optional, but we strongly encourage it. This is your chance to tell us about a success story from your project. This could be a story of a person your project helped or a significant hurdle that your project overcame. Generally, we like these to be like 1 page. You can include pictures as long as it's of adults who give permission for you to use their picture. But these are things that sometimes we'll highlight in a statewide evaluation report. So it's really great if you can keep them to 1 page and really focus and, tell something really great about your project. And then finally, appendices. Okay, so not a big addition to the local evaluation plan, just adding a few sections here and doing your, data analyses and talking about the results. And again, we'll do a webinar prior to this due date, probably 3 months beforehand, to refresh your memory on the requirements and again answer any questions that you may have. So any final questions on local evaluation plan or report? Okay.
Thank you, Casey. And it sounds like we do have one.
Okay.
Was I wrong? I must be wrong. All right. Thank you very much, Casey. And sorry for throwing you that curveball.
I do have a little bit more content. Are we still on time?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I thought you were finishing. You're still good. Carry on.
Good. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit right now about the collection of race and ethnicity data. There are a few government code sections that relate to the collection of this data that are applicable to the BSCC. And by extension, the projects we fund. So you all are required to follow them as well. So I'll briefly review these so that you can keep them in mind when you're developing your data collection instruments to collect the demographic data from your project participants. So the first one that we're going to talk about is Government Code Section 8310.5. And this section mandates that the collection of data must include and report each major Asian group, including but not limited to Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Korean, Vietnamese, Asian Indian, Laotian, and Cambodian. And also that each major Pacific Islander group, including but not limited to Hawaiian, Guamanian, and Samoan. This code section became effective January 1 of 2012. So therefore, we would expect this level of categorization to be used for your local evaluation. So if you have participants and you're reporting their demographic data, we would expect to see these subcategories here for your demographic data for race and ethnicity. There is one more government code section relevant to this, and this is 8310.9. And this code section requires the reporting of individuals who identify with more than one race or ethnicity. So basically, it requires that individuals have the option of selecting one or more ethnic or racial designations. And these multiple designations are represented in any tabulated or reported race and ethnicity data. So this code section was made effective January 1 of 2022, and therefore BSCC is expected to abide by it, and then also you as receiving funding from the BSCC to comply with these reporting standards. So this level of disaggregation is also expected to be seen in your local evaluation reports when you're reporting on the race and ethnicity of your program participants. So by doing this and allowing individuals to select multiple race and ethnicities, we honor the heritage of your participants by not forcing them to pick just one single race. So we do have a form that is available for you to use if you need help collecting race and ethnicity data that is compliant with these two code sections. So this form will be available in your orientation materials. It is optional. You're not required to use it. And we do not want you to submit these forms to us. We do not want them. It's solely for your use. You should use this just one time per project participant. Individuals shouldn't be asked to fill these things out with multiple different service providers that they may see as a part of your project. And then, of course, if you want more detailed information than you've ever wanted to know about the collection of race and ethnicity, we will include with all your materials a BSCC report that provides recommendations for the collection of race and ethnicity data. And this will be in your materials. I believe it's labeled AB 1998. It was an assembly bill that required us to provide recommendations for how race and ethnicity should be collected. So that report with all of its glorious detail will be in your materials if you're a nerd and want to dig into this like we did. Okay. Let's see. One moment here. All right. And then real quick, a couple more resources that will be in your materials are a few documents that I've identified here. The first is evaluator roles and responsibilities. And I'm not going to pull up this document and review it in detail here because of the interest of time. But I strongly suggest that you review this because it does identify the areas of collaboration between your project director and staff who may be evaluating your program, or an outside evaluator who may be evaluating your program. And these are the areas where those two individuals should be collaborating from the implementation period, during service delivery, and at the conclusion of the grant period to develop, crunch all the data and do the local evaluation report. So this document is applicable to you whether you're using an internal staff member to do the evaluation or an external evaluator. We also have a document called Data Collection Tips. And this document outlines the valid and reliable data collection methods. So it gives you suggestions and data collection best practices to minimize data errors, which include pre-testing your data collection instruments, providing training on data collection tools and procedures, and continuous data collection review and audits, just to name a few of the suggestions and best practices outlined in that document. We also have a resource on the BSCC's website that is solely dedicated to providing you with evaluation resources. So I strongly say this is a hyperlink in the presentation. So you can easily find it on our website. And this will include a variety of resources, articles, even data sources that may be useful to you around evaluation. These are not all of the resources themselves are around justice programs, but the principles and content that they demonstrate can be applied across a variety of different types of programs. Okay, so they're just really some useful resources if you want to dig into more information around how to evaluate a program. Okay. And I think that does now, Ian, conclude my portion of the presentation. That's all right. Any questions at all on this? Okay. Well, then I will turn it back over to you, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Casey, and sorry again for throwing you that curveball. We'll get that due date issue all ironed out and communicate with everybody, and all will be well, I promise. Okay, so the next thing on our agenda is another round of grantee introductions. And I would like to invite to the stage Santa Barbara. Is someone with Santa Barbara with us?
Yes.
Hi.
Sorry.
Hi,
Hello.
Laura. How you doing?
Good. Hello, I am Lemaire Kyle Griffiths. I am the Assistant Public Defender for Santa Barbara County. I am also currently on vacation in the Smoky Mountains, so I have hopped on to introduce you to the READY project. It is the holistic reentry. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. Holistic Reentry Early Access and Diversion for You project, which weaves together our department, the probation department, a Good Samaritan, which is a local shelter department in our, or not department, but sorry, community-based organization in our area, along with some other local community-based organizations to have early access to people who are charged with crimes and arrested. So post-arrest, but prior to arraignment, we would have a team of individuals that would get to talk to people while they were in jail, ideally within that first 12 to 24 hours, so that we could assess any needs, start to make connections, and also connect with DA's offices, law enforcement offices. Also, in case we notice things, for example, we have a very active pretrial project going along with our probation, but sometimes they're unable to, say, verify a job placement with a family member, something like that. We would be able to come in and also help them verify that information, so that when a person goes in front of an arraignment judge, or sometimes even before, either they'll be able to have been released with connections that will help with public safety, or once they get in front of an arraignment judge, that judge will have more confidence in making a release decision, and knowing that there are parts of the community as well as the public defender's offices that are already supporting this person, instead of what happens now, which is about a 10-minute conversation with a public defender, oftentimes over Zoom, in the courtroom, where decisions are made sometimes, or more often cases are continued in order to get information to build that layer of confidence. So our group will include an investigation component, as well as a support in order to get the data and information in, so that when we are sharing information with our other both county departments and local community-based organizations, that information will be clean and clear and able to help our folks get to the connections that they need. We'll have a focus on misdemeanor folks, but we'll also be talking to anybody who gets arrested and booked within that time.
Great, thank you. And thank you so much for joining us during your vacation. I didn't know we were breaking into that important event. That is, vacations are very, very important. So we do appreciate it. And I do just want to comment, I noticed this round of JAG, we have a lot more public defenders doing various holistic advocacy or indigent defense, or various versions of public defender operated programs, which is a little different from, JAG didn't used to have as many public defender offices amongst its grantees. So I'm really looking forward to watching those programs operate and getting to see how those work, because that is a really neat element that I'm really happy to see. Thank you, Lemaire. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay, how about Stanislaw? Is someone from Stanislaw able to take the stage?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm Jennifer Jennison. I'm the Chief Public Defender in Stanislaus County. Lemaire literally described exactly what we're doing in Stanislaus County. So they go together perfectly. We didn't even know each other was doing it, I don't think. So I'm literally repeating the same thing, but ours is called the Early Representation Partnership. And that is a partnership with the public defender's office and our sheriff's department. So just like in Santa Barbara, we're going to have a team of advocates. They're going to reach the individuals who are arrested during that critical period after arrest and prior to arraignment. What's really exciting for us is this grant gives us 2 social worker positions in the public defender's office. And that's building on our existing, what we call our client support program. So we've always been, well, for the last couple of years, connecting clients to services, but this is a more in-depth, using differently skilled people to accomplish that. So basically the sheriff allows us early access to our clients within the jail. Just as Lemaire said, we're gathering and developing, pretrial detention information. She said they usually do it about 10 minutes. I think for us, it's more like 2 or 3 minutes per individual. So there'll be better decisions made about pretrial detention. We're conducting the needs assessment, identifying those who need mental health services, which this has also allowed us to collaborate more effectively with our behavioral health department. So we're going to have individuals in our jail, and I think behavioral health is going to do that as well, so we can connect with each other and get these assessments started early. We'll identify people who are appropriate for collaborative courts and diversion. And then, of course, the whole point is provide linkage to services, develop discharge plans, provide ongoing case management. And again, exactly like Lemaire said. But the idea is to address the underlying needs that led the individuals to system involvement in the first place.
Thank you, Jennifer. And this is exactly why we do these grantee introductions. You didn't know they were doing it. They didn't know you were doing it. There's definitely a couple of people that we probably need to make sure get in contact with each other, because I saw Lemaire said, obviously, we're going to be working together. That's great. Again, we really do encourage networking between grantees, because all of you are going to have really great ideas that each of you can adapt and improve your programs for, and there's nothing but good comes from that. So that is fantastic.
Right.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
You're welcome.
All right. Can I hear from Los Angeles? Is Los Angeles around?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you for including us. My name is Tom Moore. I'm with the Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office. We are a grantee of the JAG grant funding designated for our holistic advocacy project. It's great seeing all of the other presentations around the state, and really does give me ideas for future grant ideas and partnerships. I do see variations on common themes. Love the ER models that we just saw. This particular project expands on a successful non-JAG funded pilot program. It's our client advocacy program, which embeds contracted holistic specialists into public defender offices and onto our larger multidisciplinary team. As you know, the core work of the defense team is providing zealous legal defenses, but we recognize the drivers of incarceration are things like poverty and housing insecurity, and that so many of our clients come to us in some degree of crisis. So while our public defenders are working on the legal defenses, our client advocates assist with non-legal needs in 3 areas, basically, and this is post-filing. This is wraparound services, system navigation, and mitigation input. So these are things like the wraparound services include things like housing, employment, getting government benefits or renewal of those benefits, which may have been interrupted. The menu of services really isn't limited, but it includes things like getting an ID card, property release, getting a car out of impound, maybe getting a telephone or treatment linkage too. So in the other area that these specialists help in are with system navigation. So they support our clients in things like returning to court, people who might need a reminder or some assistance with transportation. They can help get our clients connected with court-ordered services like anger management programs or drug use counseling or mental health treatment. An example of how this can help is we had a client who missed their appointment with a probation officer. And in that case, the client advocate went to the probation office with the client for support, helped them, get there, sign in, make their appointment. And, in that example, the probation officer was impressed that the client was utilizing services. And so it was a real win-win. In another case, a client was given links to mental health treatment, and the advocates stayed in contact with that client even after the case ended, the criminal case ended. So it's really client-led and client-driven. And the third way they help is with input on mitigation reports. Reports that are used in court, they might be collecting vital documents or providing any other information which could assist in a charge reduction or dismissal or reduction of incarceration or any of the other collateral, the reduction of the collateral consequences of impact with the criminal legal system. So that's what we're going to be doing.
That sounds great. And I'm going to tell you this, I really did use a random number generator. I did not know I was clustering a bunch of public defenders' offices all together, but it kind of works out well that it worked out that way, because we get to hear that. And it's interesting because I'm hearing a lot of different approaches, and I am looking forward to seeing how you guys share and adapt as you see the different approaches. Obviously, things are going to work better in County A. County B, another approach might work, but it's good to know what everybody's doing, because that way you can pick and choose. Thank you so much, Tom. Can I ask last for this group or for this session, is Ventura with us today? Thought I saw Brian. I don't know, he may be having somebody else do it. Brian, is someone from the Ventura team with us?
I think he's muted.
Uh-oh, Brian, you're muted if you're.
All right, here I am.
There he is.
Thank you very much. Well, we are going to do more traditional. We're going to be giving clients to the public defender's offices. So, no. Our program's called Transformation Ventura County. So it's split into two parts. We have our first part, which is an early intervention to youth. For youth programs, we're assigning case managers through our NGO, which is City Impact in Oxnard, California. We identify, our patrol officers identify high-risk youth along with the probation department, our schools, and we get them into programs that help them from everything from after-school programs, homework. If they're out of school, we help them get their GEDs. We help them get enrolled into college. We get them work programs. And we've even expanded into healthy lifestyles. So gyms, aerobics, boxing, stuff like that. For that, we do about 100 youth a year. Our goal was set for 50, but we were so popular that we just kept plugging away at it, using other funding to supplement City Impact with that. And then the second part of our program is we actually target the most violent criminals in our county that are conspiring in different crimes to terrorize our streets. And behind me is Sergeant Brian Whitaker, so he's going to be taking over the program for me. This is going to be our third adherence to this, and we've seen lowering of crime rates, lower recidivism. We're actually having more and more people not join gangs. So it's been a highly successful, thanks to JAG, and we're looking forward to going again. And then I just want to say I reviewed a lot of the grants for this cycle, and I was very impressed at the proposals. So I'm actually glad to be hearing who got funded, and it's kind of exciting to see the other side of it.
Thank you, Brian. And I do want to acknowledge and thank Brian. He was one of the members of our JAG scoring panel. He did a lot of work. It is not, I'm sure he'll agree, it is not a easy or simple task to be a member of a scoring panel. There's quite a bit of work that goes with it, and we do appreciate that effort, Brian.
But for that, if you want to learn more about the BSCC and the program, when you're on the other side, I'll tell you, you will write way better proposals and write for the scoring panels. So to Ian and Chad, put your emails out there. I'm putting a plug in there. It was a lot of work, but it's invaluable to learn that. So thank you.
Right. And just full disclaimer, in case anybody's wondering, Captain Slominski did not rate his proposal or any county in his size category. So if anybody's wondering about that, just be aware. We avoid those things. Okay, that brings us, believe it or not, almost dead on schedule for a break. Call it a lunch break. It's maybe a little early depending on people's habits, but we did build in about a team. Am I right there? We're right there at the break. So if we could all, if you want to step aside and get some food, stretch, whatever works for you, if we could reconvene at 11:55, kind of an off time, but that's how it worked out. And I will start us talking with a review of our program responsibilities. So I'll see you back here at 11:55, about 20 minutes. Thank you, everyone. Okay, it's about 11:55, so we'll go ahead and get ready to get started here. This is kind of the final push. The good news is we are pretty much on track to get everybody out of here on time, if maybe even not a little early. Our target is 1 o'clock for that, so we're looking good on that score. And what we're going to go into next is I'm going to start talking about program responsibilities. So in the realm of, oh, I'm sorry, let me go ahead and share my screen. That would probably help matters. So in the realm of program responsibilities, we're going to be discussing a little bit about leadership and communication. We'll talk a bit about model integrity, program modifiers, expenses requiring prior approval, prohibited expenses, and we'll talk a little bit about the plan for project director calls and program monitoring visits. Now, just a little disclaimer here, or a little caveat here. Sometimes we call this because we call this the program responsibilities, sometimes there's a tendency maybe for the financial people to maybe check out a little bit. But I do encourage my friends in the financial world to kind of stick with us here, because there is a lot of crossover between the programmatic and fiscal areas here. And there are some areas, especially when we get into prohibited expenses and expenses requiring prior approval, that the financial people will want to have a sense of as well. So let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, so when I have a slide about leadership and communication, I kind of get a little leery, because I recognize most, if not all, of the people on this call are experienced managers or supervisors of some realm. So you've all been to the same manager and project director or project management classes and supervisory classes that I went to when I was with the sheriff's office. So I'm not going to be touching on anything dramatically new or revolutionary in terms of leadership and communication. This is more by way of reminder. And the reason I like to give this reminder is because one of the things I recognize is I'm betting that most, if not all, of the project directors and financial officers and various personnel assigned to the staff, a lot of you are not wholly devoted to the JAG program. A lot of you may not, the project director is not just the JAG project director. There are other activities and areas that fall into their realm of responsibility, of which JAG might be one of many duties. Most of us nowadays are double and triple hatted in some respects. So I want to recognize that and just give everyone kind of one of the things you want to recognize is grants don't always run really well on autopilot. So they do require active management, active tracking to make sure that you stay on track. And I just want to give that fair reminder. So one of the things we do highly recommend is to ensure that your entire project team is informed of and familiar with the various aspects of your grant project and proposal. Does your entire team know about what the goals and timelines are? What key activities is the project responsible for? What is in the program budget? What expenses are allowable or unallowable? What are the terms of the grant agreement? It's important for everyone to kind of have a sense of what those are. I can tell you from my experience in the last year and a half, from the field representative standpoint, is some of the grantees that I've run into that have had problems or issues, some of that kind of there's sometimes a tendency, for example, like for the fiscal people and the program people, to kind of be walled off. And the fiscal people are just handling the receipts, and the program people are driving the program stuff, and they don't really communicate. And one group thinks the other group is looking at something when they're not, and there can be some issues there. So one of the things I do recommend is to make sure that the entire team has some level of familiarity with what's going on. Just to give you an anecdote of something I'm talking about, this is from another grant. I won't talk about who this is, but I ran into a program manager who wasn't familiar enough with the budget. They didn't know that a certain item that would have been very advantageous for their grant, for their project, was in their budget. And they really didn't have good communication with the fiscal team. So the fiscal team never mentioned to them that, hey, you haven't expended any funds in this line item. And it was a real missed opportunity for that project because they just didn't happen to know. They didn't remember that that item was in their budget. So very important, make sure your whole team is really familiar with the program. And again, I want to make that plug for managing staff turnover. It can be easy, especially when we're double and triple hatted, to just kind of say, here, read this stuff and you'll be fine, take over the grant. You're going to want to make sure that they do things like watch the orientation video, read the agreement, get fully up to speed. So one of the things that I always encourage project directors and the team as a whole to do is try to take a holistic view of what constitutes who's on your team. I can, most of the time when we originally think, okay, what does the project team consist of? We immediately think of the program staff and the fiscal team. But there are other elements that might want to have a general, make sure that you kind of think of them as part of your team. One to consider is your agency's administration. Depending on how high up in the chain of command the project director is, you might want to make sure there's a line to agency administration to make sure that if there are changes coming down, agency-wide changes, are those going to impact the grant? Does the administration fairly familiar with what's going on with the grant, just so that they know if something's going to be changed agency-wide, that if there's an impact on the grant, we know that's coming, we can plan for how we're going to mitigate that or address that. Your NGOs and your subcontractors. I mentioned earlier that grant requirements follow the dollar to the subcontractors and the subcontractors. If your subcontractors have subcontractors, if that even makes sense, I hope that all played out okay. But however many subcontractors you have, you're going to want to make sure they're on the same page as well. Evaluators are another group that's sometimes forgotten in terms of keeping them abreast of what's going on with the project. If you're making changes or adjustments to how you're operating, that may have an impact on how your evaluator looks at the data or what the evaluator sees in the data. They may see something that can be traced back to a change you make. You're going to want your evaluator to be up to speed on those things. And then obviously everybody's program is a little different. So there may be others I'm not thinking of that you might want to consider in the mindset of who's on the grant team and who needs to be kept up to speed. We all know about the danger of silos in organizations, and grant administration is one area where you're going to want to keep an eye on that and make sure that that doesn't happen, especially once the grant's up and running and starts to become a little towards the direction of autopilot. That's when you start to see communication can sometimes break down, and you're going to want to maintain that. I can tell you from my personal recommendation, what I used to do with the BSCC grant I managed when I was with the sheriff's office in Kern County is we had regular team meetings specific to the grant. We did quarterly. You figure out whatever timeline works for your project and your work capacities and whatnot. But in those meetings, we had the whole group. There were representatives from the fiscal team. There were representatives from the NGOs. I had all my NGOs in the room when we did that. Our evaluator was there. That way, when we made a change or we made a decision, we're going to do this, everybody knew and they could kind of adjust and understand what happened, or, you know, they understand what we're doing and how they need to adjust their individual portion of the grant project. I know we all know that to a degree, but it's worth focusing on. To that end, I do want you to, to a degree, think of your program analyst and your field rep as part of your team. We're on your side. It is very much in our interest. We very much want your programs to succeed as much as possible. So keeping us in the loop. Now, that being said, can Chad and I attend your quarterly or monthly or bi-monthly, whatever you end up doing, team meetings? No, I'm afraid we don't have that level of availability or mobility, but open communication, let us know what's going on. If there are significant changes coming down the pike, keeping us apprised so that we can help keep you on track, give you advice, maybe point out if that impacts the grant in some way that's unanticipated. The more we know, the more we can help you. I do just want to add in, I did add this quote from George Bernard Shaw: the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Obviously, you want to be very clear in your communications with everybody involved. I know that's, again, that probably goes without saying, but I will tell you an anecdote. One of the more painful discussions that we had with a grantee once upon a time was a situation where we were corresponding with email back and forth. The problem that they were trying to address was described one way. Then I was giving them direction on here's how we can address this. But what I was getting back wasn't really tracking and make sense. So finally, we decided to go with a Zoom TA call. And the moment in the conversation where the grantee said, well, Ian, let me explain what's really going on. That was the moment when I knew we were in trouble, because it turns out that the communication wasn't that clear and the problem the grantee was facing was very different than the problem I was trying to solve based on the email communications. So we're here to help you. Please let us know how we can help you, and keep those lines of communication open. The next thing I want to talk about in this realm is maintaining program integrity. Now, for some of you familiar with evidence-based programming, fidelity monitoring, and stuff like that, when we're talking about that, this is a little bit different concept. It's related, but I kind of want to put it in its own little box. When we talk about evidence-based programming and fidelity monitoring, we're more talking about your specific interventions that you're doing as part of your program. This is a related field, but what I'm talking about here is adherence and integrity to your program as proposed in your proposal. If you'll remember, I mentioned earlier that your proposal is part of your grant agreement, because that's the document where you told us what you're going to do, and that's the document which we look to when we're understanding what activities fit within the grant and what activities do not fit within the grant. That's the basis on which you were scored. So it's really important to keep that touchstone document close at hand and in mind as you're running your program. So now at the beginning of your project is the best time to start to implement those safeguards to make sure that your project stays on track and adheres to the program as designed or as proposed in your RFP response or your proposal. Some of the things that I highly recommend you implement is program policies and procedures that are specific to your grant. You should have some kind of manual or policy, whether it's an addendum to your agency manual or its own set aside thing. You have your own policy architecture. I leave it to your best judgment how to fit that in your larger system, but you should have some manual where your team can read about how the grant's supposed to operate, who's supposed to do what, and then make sure if you make changes that you incorporate those changes into that policy and procedures manual. That is one of the things we look for on monitoring visits. Another item related to that is grant-specific organization charts and grant-specific duty statements. They're not talking about your general, I know most agencies have a full organization chart. I'm talking one that lays out who's involved in the grant and what are they doing. Duty statements that describe what people are doing for the grant. Again, these can be addendum to the larger versions of these documents that exist for your agency as a whole, or they can be set aside as part of your grant-specific documentation, as long as you have it and staff know where it is and it can get to it. And that's one thing I do want to point out is make sure your staff, it seems to go without saying, but make sure your staff can actually access and know where to get at those materials. So if they need to look something up, they can. Staff training is another element that you're going to want to implement early on. And as you know, documented training is the way to go. If you document what kind of training you're giving to your staff, you're way ahead of the game. Consider the difference between initial or onboarding training. You might be doing that right now because you're standing up your grant program. So you're going to train this new team you brought on board. Also keep that in play for a new staff member who comes on board later on, and then consider the availability of ongoing trainer. If there's a refresher training or new elements that you want to train people in, having a robust training program is part and parcel of ensuring that you've got those that you're sticking to your program. The version of how you do training is totally up to you. It can be formal classes. I know some people do kind of almost like a field training system where they're checking off that new people have gone through certain elements of their job. However you go about doing that, just have a good training system in place. I do highly recommend some kind of quality assurance process. Again, we'll talk about that more in the context of evidence-based programming, but in general, if you have some kind of process where a supervisor or a manager or somebody is periodically going through and checking to make sure that key elements of the program are being operated as designed or as intended, to make sure that we're still on track and not inadvertently changing things. And the last thing that I strongly recommend is some supervisor, and to the degree this is applied, not all programs would have something like this, but most of you are going to have some kind of, if you're dealing with participants, you're going to have case files or something like that. If you're doing task forces, you're going to have operational files or something like that. You should have those files. You should not only have those files, but periodically, I recommend supervisors or managers or project directors spot check those documents to make sure that they truly do substantiate what the program is doing and that it does indeed fit with the program as designed. All of these safeguards that I'm recommending you put in place are to avoid what in the policy world, or some people who have been to management schools and whatnot have probably heard of policy drift. Policy drift is where one day you implement a policy, it's written, everybody reads it, and in the first period of time, everybody's familiar with it, so they're following the policy. But over time, we tweak this, somebody decides to do this a little different, and down the road, suddenly some time has passed and you realize you're not following your policy, you're doing something completely different. Well, that can happen with grants as well. I call it program drift, but it's the same idea. You start making little changes, they may make sense at the moment, nobody kind of consolidates and changes the policy, and suddenly we're not really doing what the grant was meant to do. So make sure you have those safeguards in process. If you're a new grantee, now is the time to get those in place early. If you are a returning grantee that's continuing an existing project, take a look at those. This is a good time to make sure they're up to date, that they still make sense. And then I strongly recommend a periodic review to make sure that those policies, those training guides, those quality assurance processes are making sense and keeping your project on track. Remember, when you put something on an invoice, you put an expense on an invoice, you want to do something in a project, you're putting in data in your progress reports. When we see something that doesn't hew to your program as discussed or budgeted in your proposal, that's going to be a red flag. We're going to start looking at that, and we're going to want to know, hey, what the heck happened? And if it's too much of a deviation, it might not be something that we can allow. So in the event that you do substantively change something, that is definitely something that we're going to need to get documented, and it's important that you discuss it with the field rep, that's me, well in advance of making a change. Okay, it's very important. If you feel the need to make a substantive change, get with me early so we can make sure that it's a permissible change. We're not changing the scope of the project, which is very problematic and usually not permissible, to make sure that we're still within the realm of what the project was rated and awarded for. Now, obviously, we have to keep in mind there's a balance, right? This is not to suggest that every decision you make results in a phone call or an email to me. If you're teaching class, let's say your proposal said that you're going to teach, you're going to put on employment classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then down the road you decide actually that doesn't work. Let's do those classes on Wednesdays and Fridays. That's not changing the scope, unless there was some really specific reason in your proposal that said it had to be Tuesdays and Thursdays for some dramatically important reason. That's not so dramatic that we're talking about a program modification that's going to have to go through somebody. You can make decisions as you move forward, but if you're substantively changing something from your proposal, get a hold of me. Let's meet at least to make sure that if some kind of documentation or modification is required, we get that in place before the modification takes effect. All right. With that in mind, are there any questions I can answer about anything I've discussed so far in terms of program responsibilities? Not hearing anything. I think somebody's mic might be on, so please do check your mics. And if you unmuted to ask a question, go ahead. Hearing none. Chad, do we have anything in the chat?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat.
All right. Let me move on then. We're looking good. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to talk about are some items that require prior approval. Now, I know we've all seen in some realm of our lives or another this great mantra that it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. That's a very common. I don't know that it takes so much into government work, but we do hear that mantra. I am here to tell you that that mantra is not a good mantra to follow in grant administration. Okay, I would much rather hear from you and make sure something's okay. And it may be something where I say, yeah, that's well within your bounds of something to do. Go ahead and do that. I'd rather do that than to have you do something and later on I have to say, I'm sorry, that's not okay. It's just much easier to get those taken care of ahead of time. So if you're making changes, get with me ahead of time. And that it very much applies to certain expenses that require prior approval. And the important item with this is I want to make sure everyone clearly understands that the items I'm going to talk about require specific approval from the field representative, even if they're already in your budget. This may be, the items I'm talking about may be clearly listed in your proposal's budget, or you may have done a budget modification, which we'll talk about those tomorrow, but you may have done a budget modification where that item is clearly listed. But if it falls into one of these categories, there are additional approval steps you must take before you actually make those expenses. And I want to let everybody know up front, retroactive approvals are very problematic, and I'm going to be trying to very much avoid those. Don't be surprised if you get with me and say, hey, we forgot to ask for approval for this. We already did it. Is that okay? Don't be surprised if I say, sorry, no. The reason I do that is because if I do too much retroactive approval, that can show up as an audit issue where it's clear that even if it would have been okay at the end of the day, it can show up as a flag because we're not really following the procedures and the rules as they exist, and that can be a problem in and of itself. So understand, I'm not just saying no to be mean, I'm saying no to protect the program as a whole. So let's talk about those expenses. Again, even if they're already in your budget. The first one I want to point out is program incentives and participant support items. And you'll notice I've given you some page references in the PowerPoint. And if you go to these page items, especially like in the realm of program incentives and participant support items, there's a lengthy list of examples of what some of those items are. So we're talking about things like generally things that you're buying and giving to a participant. For example, if you're buying, I know there's some programs where they buy work clothes or work equipment because you've got a jobs program or something along those lines. Rental assistance, housing, things like that. I don't know, there's a lot of that in this program, in this round, but if you're giving something directly to a client, you're using grant funds to give something to a participant, that's something you need to get approved beforehand. Now, this one is one where you fill out a form at the beginning before you do any of those kinds of items. And then once you've filled out that form that explains certain elements about how you're going to go about it and how you're going to track it, you are good for the rest of the grant unless you change your operations, you're changing what those incentives are. You only have to get that approval one time. So that's item one. And I do want to note, there are certain items that I mentioned this early, that you'll see mentioned in the BSCC guide because they are okay for some state grants, but they are not okay for JAG. And that is food, beverages, gift cards, and stipends. I've checked in with BJA to make sure of that, and those items are not allowable in JAG. The next item I want to talk about in terms of prior approval being required is equipment. Now, equipment is a very specific definition, and I want to make sure we define it clearly. So when you're buying items, when you're buying things, physical objects, they fall into the category of either being supplies or equipment. Now, if it's equipment, it requires prior approval. So how do we define equipment? You've got it right here. Any item with an acquisition cost of $35,000 or more, including tax and installation, and that's a per unit cost or a per total package cost. Let me go into what I mean by that and give a couple examples just to make sure we're on the same page, because we have had some confusion about this in the past. Let's say you are buying 35 $100 items that in one invoice that tallies up to $3,500. That is supplies because your per unit cost, your per item cost is less than 3,500, right? 35 $100 items. That's not supplies. That's not equipment. So as long as that's in your budget and it's otherwise allowable, you can go ahead and make that purchase as just part of your normal operation. However, you're buying one item that costs $3,500 for that one particular item or more. And that includes if it's $3,400, but you add tax and installation, it gets over the $3,500, it meets that criteria. You're going to need to seek prior approval because that constitutes equipment. The package cost, that's like, for example, let's say you're buying a package deal where you're buying an expensive, let's say it's an expensive computer system, not just you're just buying a laptop, but you're buying like a computer setup that comes with a monitor and a printer. It's all one package, and that whole package comes out to $3,500 or more, then that would constitute equipment. If you're not sure if something is equipment or not, reach out to us. We'll have a discussion. Sometimes there's nuance that we have to figure out. If you're not sure, please reach out before you make the expense to make sure that we get that okayed, or I can tell you, no, that supplies, carry on with your day. You don't need to talk to me anymore. So I want to be clear on that. A couple of things I want to say about equipment that are really important. Number one, once you buy equipment, please note that the federal guidelines do have specific requirements that you track those items on your inventory. So if you go to that DOJ grant guide that I gave you a link to, if you go to page 44, they've actually got a list of what things you're required to keep track of on your inventory for any equipment you buy for the JAG program, or for the grant program, JAG in this case. It's the stuff you would expect: serial number, description, location, et cetera, et cetera. It's nothing truly exotic, but you'll want to make sure that your tracking follows that line. Please talk to me if you're going to dispose of any equipment that you bought with grant funding, because there are some specific JAG guidelines we have to follow if you bought equipment with JAG funds and now you're going to get rid of it. You're going to sell it, you're going to get rid of it, however that's going to happen. When it comes to disposition, please reach out to us before you do anything. The other thing I want to say that's really important about equipment is, if you have equipment, especially large purchases of equipment, like large big ticket items, it is very important to make those purchases early in the grant. You should be starting to look at that now, and once you get under contract, get that process started now. The reason being, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, I know county procurement processes can often take a long time, never mind the fact that you got to get BSCC approval first. So you're going to want to build yourself a reasonable timeline. The other reason we strongly encourage you to get your equipment purchases underway early is because the reasonableness of a particular piece of equipment can be impacted by when you're going to actually receive that piece of equipment. Let me give you just a general example. When you buy equipment, you're buying it for the grant project. So let's say I'm a grantee and I'm going to buy a $90,000 patrol car for my grant. That may be perfectly reasonable, but if I buy that up front, then that really big purchase item, and it was in my budget, let's say, that makes sense because I'm going to get that car in a reasonable amount of time, and I'm going to be able to use it for the grant for a reasonable amount of time, commensurate with that large dollar price tag that came with it. But if that car isn't going to show up until the last 6 months of the grant, that could be seen as an unreasonable expense, because we're spending an enormous amount of money for an item that the grant's only going to be able to take advantage of in the last tiny bit of the grant. So you may well have a $90,000 patrol car clearly budgeted in your budget, and you may have that letter from BSCC that you've gotten the approval for me to go ahead and move forward with that purchase. But if we're into 2026 and you say, okay, we're buying the car now, that could be problematic because the grant's not going to be able to really take advantage of that given how much we're spending on it. So please, please, please move forward with any equipment purchases as early as you can in the process. Another item I want to point out that requires prior approval is out-of-state travel. There are certain regulations about what needs to be done before you go to certain states and certain approvals that we need. So that's an important item to keep in mind. Okay, I do want to relate to you that DOJ has a separate list of items that require prior approval, and you'll still get that approval from me. But you can see here, there's some overlap, equipment and capital expenditures. If you look in the DOJ guideline, you'll see a threshold of $5,000. But we go with the more restrictive standard here. So we're talking about the $3,500 threshold that I mentioned on the previous slide. Please keep that in mind. Don't get confused. Computing devices and software, we're talking large equipment size purchases of that. We're not talking about you just bought a laptop, but larger purchases that fit that equipment description. Those require prior approval. Pre-award costs, there's not really something that we do in our grant process, but it's on the list, so I include it here. If you are hiring a consultant, please get a hold of me before you move forward with that, because depending on how much that consultant's being paid and some other items, there may be special authorization required that I have to pass up to DOJ. So if you're hiring a consultant and they're going to be paid over, I believe it's $250 a day, please reach out to me to double check on that to make sure that we get those approvals in place. Foreign travel is another one that requires a prior approval. And then confidential funds. If you're going to be using grant funds for undercover drug buys or informants or something along those lines, there are some very specific procedures that need to be in place. And there's a document that you have to sign attesting that you've done those procedures that I have to pass up to BJA. So please, and you do that once at the beginning of the grant before you start making those expenditures. So please do that if that's a part of your grant process. I just want to emphasize here a couple of things. It is really important, like I said, that we make sure we get those approvals in place before you commit to the expense. Please make sure that you're doing that beforehand. And when I say prior approval, please give us some reasonable lead time, especially if it's a big purchase. The bigger it is, the more complex it might be. So it's important to give us some lead time. I'm going to be out in the field. I'm going to be moving around. Because if you have an internal timeline, you've got to make that purchase tomorrow afternoon. I might not be able to look into that approval and make sure everything's in order fast enough to do it. So please give Chad and I some lead time to review, to make sure there's no special prohibitions, and make sure we're on track with that. Let me check something really quick. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss something. The other thing is, please make sure you get written approval from me, okay? It's really easy for us we might be chatting something on the phone, or I'm visiting you and we discuss something and I say something like, yeah, that's fine. I'm not planning on going anywhere, but if I win the lottery or get hit by a bus or something, you're going to want to have the written approval from me that says I approve this purchase. So a replacement field rep comes in and you're not relying on the fact that you and I had a phone call or a conversation. So please make sure you get written explicit permission or approval for these items. All right. Any questions on prior approval items before I move on? Chad, do we have anything in the chat room regarding prior approval?
We do not have anything.
All right. Again, if you got questions later, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Okay, I'm going to move on to prohibited expenses. Now, this is another one where we got to keep in mind there's multiple lists that we're working with here, because we have BSCC guidelines, we have federal guidelines, and believe it or not, JAG has its own set of prohibitions that are specific to JAG. So even if these items are in your grant, in your approved budget, even if they're in there and they're approved, we cannot make expenses for these items. We'll talk about what to do if they're in your proposal at the end here, but let me go through what those items actually are. Some of them are pretty obvious, and you'll see some overlap between us and DOJ. So bonuses and commissions. You want to give your employees a Christmas bonus? Great. You want to do it with grant funds? Sorry, can't do that. Lobbying, and you can go on in the grant administration guide, there's detailed explanation of what constitutes lobbying. Any kind of expenses for lobbying are strictly prohibited. Real property, you can't buy land or a building with grant funds, or improvements to real property. Those are another thing that's prohibited. Interest, charges, fees, and penalties. You get some kind of penalty for your bank, the grant can't cover that. Likewise, dues, licenses, and fees are prohibited. So if we can't use grant funds to, let's say, pay for one of the statewide organizations that many of our agencies are part of, to pay for those memberships. That's not something we can approve with grant funds. Some of you have medical personnel that have licensing fees. That's not something that can be built into the grant fund. Fee or other fees. Depreciation is another thing to watch out for. Now, normally depreciation isn't like a standalone expense, but if you have other allotted expenses or allocated expenses, depreciation cannot be figured into those expenses and then flow through to the grant funds. So those are some of the prohibited items to keep in mind from the BSCC angle. Now, DOJ, and again, you'll see a lot of overlap here. They also prohibit land acquisition, compensation of federal employees. If a federal employee is somehow involved in your grant, you can't pay their compensation. If a DOJ employee is going to be traveling in relation to your grant somehow, the grant cannot pay for their travel. Again, bonuses and commissions, lobbying, again, those are defined. You can go to the DOJ grant guide. The definitions are very similar, so there won't be too much change there. Fundraising activities. We cannot pay for fundraising activities with grant funds. There's a whole category that DOJ references called unallowable costs. One of them to keep an eye out for is entertainment. And entertainment in their description includes things like giveaways and trinkets and what we call swag, things like that. Those are not things that we can pay with grant funds. Fines and penalties, we already mentioned. Home office workspace or related utilities is another thing that the DOJ does not allow us to charge to the grant. Honorea doesn't come up too much, like a recognition for somebody like that. I think this goes without saying, but just in case, bar charges and alcoholic beverages are a no-go. Membership fees to organizations whose primary activity is lobbying. That's another one that falls under that lobbying category. And then food and beverages. Now, with food and beverages, please understand, if you have a line item like travel expense where you're paying per diem for an employee who's going to travel, and part of that per diem is they're going to eat food while they're traveling for your project, and that's built into your grant, that is okay. What we're talking about here is buying food directly with grant funds is not allowable. So other than paying like a per diem to a traveling employee, assuming that's otherwise allowable, other than that, food and beverages are not allowable expenses. Likewise, gift cards and stipends are not allowable per the DOJ. I've got one more list of prohibited expenses, and then I'll pause for questions. JAG, as you notice, has its own specific list, and I'll do the first one last. So I'm going to skip that one and come back to it. But you'll notice vehicles, vessels, meaning boats, or aircraft. And you'll see here there's some exclusions that are allowable for police cruisers, police boats, and police helicopters. I think we do have a couple of police cruisers that are in people's budgets. I did not notice any boats or helicopters. So other than that, we cannot buy vehicles with grant funds. Luxury items, this should go without saying. Police cruiser, probably okay. Police Ferrari, definitely not okay. Anything that would constitute a luxury item is not something we can purchase with JAG funds. We already talked about real estate. Construction projects, if something constitutes a construction project other than a penal code, a penal or correctional institution, which is not something that we're doing with this grant, construction projects would be unallowable. And then I'll go up to this one. I want to point this one out very directly. Any direct or indirect use of JAG funds to provide security enhancements or equipment for any non-governmental entity that is not engaged in criminal justice or public activity. And we'll kind of use a fairly strict definition of when we're talking about what constitutes criminal justice or public safety activity. So buying equipment for your NGOs, you got to get approval anyway, but that's an important point to realize that if that's one of the reasons I would turn down an equipment purchase, is because it's going to a non-governmental entity that is not engaged in criminal justice or public safety. And then lastly, I just want to point out any other similar matters. If it might fit one of these things, it's probably not going to work. Something a piece of advice that I want to provide for all of these prohibited expenses, and this reaches to the requiring prior approval as well. Obviously, there's some nuance and there's some level of interpretation to does a particular thing fall under one of these categories. my strong advice is the moment you are feeling you're getting a little bit clever in developing a logic that makes an item that might be equipment or might be on a prohibited expense list, and you're coming up with a clever logic of why it really doesn't fall under that category, please stop what you're doing and touch base with me, because we can all come up with our interpretations and nuances, but that doesn't mean that logic's going to track for me, an auditor, or our BJA policy advisor. So there might be gray areas, or this might or might not qualify. Better to check with me. Worst comes to worst, I'll turn around and check with the BJA policy advisor and make sure it's really going to be okay. I don't want you to expend significant amounts of money on something that at the end of the day, I'm going to have to tell you is not allowable. So, and another item that I just want to point out, and then I'll pause for questions, is these prohibitions and requirements pass down to your NGO. So if you've got a subcontractor, they cannot purchase anything off the prohibited list either. And if they're going to purchase equipment, assuming it doesn't violate this JAG stricture that I have written here, if they're going to purchase equipment, they need to request permission through you to me to buy that equipment. So with that, I know that was a lot of information. I'll talk about what to do if this stuff is in your budget right now. But before I do that, are there any questions I can answer? Not hearing any. Chad, do you have anything?
Nothing real specific in the chat, but somebody did ask a question. Can you touch just a little bit on the process for the submitting of approval? I'm not sure if you did or not.
Sure, I briefly touched on it for the sake of time, but I'll go back. It depends on what you're asking for. That's why I didn't go into detail. The best way to do this is to reach out to us when you're ready to seek that approval, and we'll walk you through the process. Just to give you a little preview, if it's participant supports, we have a specific form that we have you fill out. You fill out that form, you get it back to us, and then I approve it. You get an email that says I have approved, Ian's approved this. This is all good. And like I said, then you can make as long as you don't change what you said in that form, you are good moving forward. For equipment, you're going to fill out a letter on letterhead, and the grant guide has the specific items you need to address. And as I mentioned, the grant guide, I gave you a specific page reference. Let me go back and find that. It's on page 30 of the BSCC guide, and it'll tell you exactly what you need to address in that letter. But when you're ready to seek those approvals, let us know, and then we'll say, okay, this is what we need you to do, because they can be a little different for each specific item. I know that's not a satisfying answer, but is that good enough for now? And please reach out to us when you're ready to do this.
I think that'll work. There is one more question that just came up.
Sure.
What is the process for submitting approval of a non-competitive approach for a contract?
That is a whole process. When you're ready to do that, please reach out. But basically, you're going to fill. It's similar to what I mentioned earlier. It gets kind of complicated. It depends on the amount. In most cases, if you are under, I believe the number is 250,000, and you follow your county procurement process, you're fine. But check with me to make sure, because there are some nuances. So if you're going to go forward with a sole source, please let us know. I can look into the details, because like I said, they can be different depending on what it is you're doing. And in cases where we're talking about big items, I may have to pass that up to DOJ. So again, we can talk about that offline for specific projects. If you're looking at sole source, let me know and we'll get started on that process. Anything else, Chad?
No, that's it.
Okay, and I apologize, it's not, for the sake of time, I know that's not a very satisfying answer, but there are some nuances with some of this stuff. So I don't want to say something that in turn applies to everyone. And then one of those nuances come into play and your process is going to be a little different. So let me move on because we do have a couple of other items to quickly touch base, and then we'll wrap up for the day. I do have another link here, just another place for you to get to the admin guides. Part of our process will include project director calls. We'll establish a regular schedule. The team and I are going to kind of get together with that and establish so you kind of know when to expect those, but we'll post them well in advance so everybody knows. We do ask that the project director and the authorized physical officer at a minimum show up. The rest of your team can be on those meetings as well. They will be virtual. Some of the things we do in those those director calls are do project updates and announcements. Sometimes we'll loop back and do training on specific items because something's come up or we want to re-emphasize something. And it's also another opportunity for networking. So you'll be hearing more about project director calls. Please do your best to make sure you can make those so that we can stay all on the same page and keep good communication. Another thing that will be happening are monitoring visits. I'll talk about these very quickly, but starting probably in the next few months, I want everybody to get under contract and have a chance to kind of get their feet on the ground. But it is my intention to do an initial monitoring visit for everyone. So I do want to visit each of your programs in the first year of the project. So between now and July of next year, I'm hoping to hit everybody. So that's going to be an opportunity for me to come see what's going on with your project. What problems are you facing? We'll go, and one of the things we'll do on initial monitoring visits is we'll discuss the comprehensive monitoring visit in greater detail. We'll probably do that in a project director call too. The comprehensive monitoring visit is something that will happen in year 2 and year 3. Those are, as the name implies, very comprehensive reviews of all of the grant requirements. We'll be looking in your books. I'll bring an auditor to make sure that all your expenses are in line with everything. It's a way to make sure that you're on track and hitting all those grant requirements that we have. And you'll get plenty of notice. I don't do a lot in the way of surprise inspections, so we'll arrange that as time comes by. Now, most technical assistance we can handle by phone, email, or Zoom call. So if you need help, please reach out to us. We can put together a meeting. We can talk about specific elements of your program. That's doable. If for some reason virtual doesn't work and you feel the need to have me actually show up for technical assistance, or if I feel like I'm just not understanding, we may do a in-person technical assistance monitoring visit where I actually show up and we'll sit down in a room and talk out whatever's going on with the project that you need help with. So don't hesitate to reach out if you need help. That's the entire reason we're here. Closeout monitoring, we'll address that later. It's not something that's always necessary, but in case it's needed, I do want to mention it. And then sometimes we may show up for a special event if we're invited, a graduation or something along those lines. Basically, my title is field representative. That means I move around. I do enjoy the travel. I can't wait to come visit you all. So if you need me to come visit you, schedule allowing, I certainly can make that and make that trip. And then the last thing I just want to touch on is communications. Most of your correspondence will come through this JAG email that we've been mentioning. You'll have my email as well. I do ask if you want to communicate directly with me, that's fine, but at least CC the JAG email so that if it's something the rest of the JAG, if I'm out of the office, it's something the rest of the team can address for you. You don't have to wait for me to get back. It helps keep them in the loop, and it creates a central repository of our communications so that we know where to look if we got to backtrack and figure out what we were talking about. So with that, I've discussed quite a bit. Is there anything else that I can talk about before we do a final round of grantee introductions and then wrap up for the day? Doesn't sound like we have anything. Chat, are we still clear in the chat?
We are clear.
All right, let's do our last round of orientations, and then we will go ahead and wrap up for the day. And I am seeing something in the chat that you've got an over $250,000 sole source. So yes, LA, please reach out to me. Let's talk about that. I'll do a little research into those procedures, and we'll make sure we get that taken care of so you can move forward with that sole source. All right. So for my next introduction, is Mendocino available?
Yes, we're right here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Hi, this is Jeff Aaron. I'm the public defender for Mendocino County. I don't have much to say. Santa Barbara, Shasta, and a number of the other counties had pretty much kind of laid out what we're trying to do with holistic defense and things like that. I should note that everything that our northern cousins, Humboldt, said about the issues with fentanyl, the drug trade, cannabis, manufacture legal and illegal, and the gray market applies to Mendocino as well. We're all part of the Emerald Triangle, and we all either are distinguished by that or are stigmatized by it. I'm not quite sure. We've gotten one caseworker who before our caseworker, we basically had no holistic defense whatsoever. We have one caseworker, one paralegal, and one attorney who are working with us on these issues. We're obviously a very small rural county, so the money is greatly appreciated. We couldn't do these things without it.
And we're really glad that you got the grant and you're going to be doing those efforts, because that's a big area that needs attention, and I'm glad we're able to support you. And again, it's how you took the words right out of my mouth, Jeff. This is obviously another opportunity for networking, because there's another group that has a lot in common, and I definitely recommend you guys reach out to each other and do some networking on that score.
Will do.
Placer County, I know Placer County has a very sweeping and touches a lot of things. So is Placer County with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, go ahead.
Hi. Thank you for having us. I'm Katie Orsino with the Placer County Sheriff's Office. This upcoming grant will be our third cycle of JAG funding. So we've kind of considered ourselves to be veterans of the program. So we like to keep some of the things in place that we kind of have proof of concept of, and we know we've seen success with. And then each round, we've been trying to add something new to see if we can bring about something new, some new changes to our program. Some of them are successful, some of them aren't. So this upcoming program, we're going to take a combination of our tried and true drug enforcement task forces with some youth drug education components, and then incorporate some of our very successful, culturally relevant mental health and substance abuse services that we've been providing. And then there's a couple of smaller components. So Placer County has two task forces under the JAG grant. The main one is the Placer County Special Investigations Unit, which primarily investigates what we call white drug sales, which is methamphetamine, fentanyl, cocaine, etc. And then we have the marijuana suppression team, which targets illegal marijuana grows and distribution operations in our region. Both of those task forces have been participating with the JAG grant over the previous two cycles. So we're excited to continue those efforts because those task forces are very successful. Another component that we're continuing on is the Right Choice program. This is a program that takes place in our local school. That's a very well respected and highly requested program. And we partner with schools in our community to hold this one-day event, which typically brings together hundreds of students and goes through scenarios in which a student may experience an overdose of a drug, and how that may impact their students, their family, their community, and it's all scenario based. But this is something that has been very successful in our schools, and school administrators and parents and students all really get a lot out of the program. So we're going to continue that one. We also work with two very well-respected nonprofits in our community, the Latino Leadership Council and Sierra Native Alliance. And these organizations provide culturally relevant assessments, referrals, and outpatient services for populations in our community that need these services the most. We also partner with the Sheriff's Office Placer Sheriff's Activity League, and excuse me, this organization gets in touch with youth in our community and works with the Latino Leadership Council to make connections between youth in the community and law enforcement to build positive relationships. This next round of funding, we're also going to do a new component, which is some funding for cameras to be installed in some of our local schools to help with school safety, and then some visibility of law enforcement to have access to this camera feeds in our school systems, just in case a crisis were to occur, and we would be able to have a little bit more planning and visibility within our schools in case one of those awful situations did occur. But in general, just for added school safety and partnership with our schools. So those are the main components we're tackling in this round of funding. So again, some tried and true methods, and then some new ideas as well.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing, there's a lot of elements to that program, so I'm looking forward to seeing them all play out. I noticed that when I saw your proposals, that they're doing a lot of different stuff, and I remember that from the last round, so no surprise there. All right. Is Sonoma with us right now? Someone from Sonoma County.
Yes, sir.
All right. Don't call me sir. I left the sheriff's office to avoid being called sir. Go ahead, Brian.
All right, great. Thank you. I'm Brian Morris, the public defender in Sonoma County, and I'm here with Jeremy Scannell. And our program is about expanding our holistic representation services. And how we're going to do that is we're going to have a DMV liaison for our clients. Driver's licenses might not seem like a big deal, but they are to our clients and can really affect how they go about living their lives. So we're going to work on that. We're also going to work on mental health and get we have a social worker currently, but we're going to get a social worker that hopefully can write diversion reports. So get more people into mental health diversion, especially with, I think, more people going into mental health diversion from felonies, since the Department of State hospitals maybe doesn't want them to arrive on their doorstep. The last thing that we're going to do in this program is to have an attorney supervise a unit, basically get everybody under the same roof, get everybody organized with the holistic representation, and use that person to be a point person for collaborating with CBOs and other departments, and also helping out with the DMV, who, by the way, actually have connected with us, the actual DMV, which is very exciting. So we're going to work hopefully to get our clients some services and access to DMV.
That's great. We did something similar in the agency I used to work for, getting driver's licenses for people, and it's great if you're able to have that connection with DMV. It makes it much more feasible. That's great. All right, and then last but not least for the day, do we have Solano County?
We saved the best for last, right?
Outstanding. Now you got to live up to it.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Jennifer McDermott. I'm the Admin Services Manager for Solano County Probation. I'm here with a couple of my team members, our Director of Admin Services, Jen Benzon, and our Staff Analyst, Sadao Holman. And our program is named PREVENT, which is an acronym for Prevent, prevention, reduction of violence, and empowering new transitions. See, I'm ready for lunch, sorry. So the idea behind this new project is that it is going to be a one-stop center with programs for at-promise youth and their families, and be a pre-arrest diversion program. It's going to be this one-stop center is actually modeled on the Harbor Center out of Las Vegas, so Clark County, Nevada, if anyone's familiar with that. That center opened up in 2016. And really, it's going to be designed as a central hub for pre-arrest diversion and education activities to address youth and their families related to behavioral and mental health issues, and have other coordinated services, and try to address these youth before they become justice involved. So our partners are going to be able to refer youth for mental health services, behavioral health services, crisis issues, and families will be able to actually walk into the center and receive free same-day services tailored to whatever the need is. And that is the intent of that, is really to close that gap between an incident or an issue and actual connection with services and support. The resources offered at the center are going to include tutoring, educational support, mentoring, substance abuse interventions, conflict management, job training, counseling, and cognitive behavioral therapy. It's also going to include pro-social activities. So really connecting youth to positive adult role models, positive pro-social activities to give them an alternative to the path that they're headed down. All of this is going to be culturally relevant and have culturally relevant mentorship and linkages. The services at the center are going to be voluntary, family-centered and trauma-informed, and as I mentioned, culturally responsive. This is actually going to be an expansion of our youth services center. I know I'm careful with the language because of funding, but we have successfully opened a youth services center where we're already providing services like that for our youth in our community. And so we're looking forward to being able to continue this work.
All right, thank you. Another example of early intervention, and it sounds like a pretty broad menu of services that you can customize to the client's needs. So that's excellent. Like it. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of today's agenda. I do just want to make sure that if there are any last minute questions, please go ahead and let me know. I know no one wants to be the person to raise their hand right before the class is going to get out, so to speak, leaning back to our school days. But Chad, do we have any questions that we have not addressed over the course of the day?
No, I mean, pretty much hit everything.
All right. So today we covered administrative realm. We've discussed the data and collection and the program realm. Tomorrow we'll be back here, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at 9 a.m. to largely focus on fiscal matters. However, we do recommend the program people continue to attend because, as I've said, it's really important to maintain that crossover between the fiscal and program elements of your project. So I hope to see everybody there. And with that, we got you. I'm 2 minutes over, so that's not too terrible. So thank you very much. We'll go ahead and adjourn, and I'll see everybody in the morning. Thank you.